The most dangerous man in the kingdom is standing in my room, watching me like he already knows something I don't. "You don't look afraid," he says. "I should be. I'm alone with a man powerful enough to ruin me without consequence. And yet, I'm the one who let him in. That was my first mistake. I didn't know it then, but it wouldn't be my last. And to understand why I let him in, you have to understand the night my life ended. Not when I was poor, not when I was invisible, but the night my fiancé stood at the altar and chose my best friend instead, while wearing the silk I made for our wedding. If these stories move you, please subscribe and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. I never want these voices to get lost in the sea, and your support is what keeps me writing for you. Chapter 1. I was really doing this. I stood in the servants' corridor behind the great hall of Ashworth Manor, pressing my back against the cold stone wall, trying to convince myself I had not entirely lost my mind. The sound of laughter and lute strings leaked through the heavy oak doors. Somewhere beyond them, 200 guests were settling into their seats for a wedding feast. Joseph's wedding feast. Joseph and Isadora's wedding feast. My ex-fiancé, my ex-best friend, married to each other, in matching ceremonial cloaks probably, because Isadora had always loved a coordinated entrance. If betrayal were a trade, those two would have cornered the market. I pressed my palms flat against the wall and breathed. The stone was damp and smelled of rain and old moss and the particular brand of regret that only comes from making a public promise you cannot keep, because that was the real problem. Not the wedding, not the humiliation of attending. The lie. It had happened 3 weeks ago at Lady Pemberton's autumn luncheon, one of those interminable gatherings where women with more title than sense sat around nibbling candied figs and comparing the quality of their household linens. I had been cornered. Isadora had sent the invitation personally, hand-delivered by her own footman, sealed with wax the color of fresh blood. A personal touch. She wanted me to know this was deliberate. And when Lady Pemberton asked, with that pitying tilt of her powdered head, whether I would be attending alone, something inside me snapped. "I will be attending with my betrothed," I heard myself say, "a lord of considerable standing." The words left my mouth before my brain had any say in the matter. My brain, in fact, was screaming. My mouth did not care. Lady Pemberton's eyebrows rose. "A lord? How wonderful. What house?" "A prominent one," I said, because I had already committed to the lie and saw no reason to commit to specifics. "How mysterious." Lady Pemberton smiled. "We shall all look forward to meeting him." By sundown, every noble household in the city quarter knew. Zara Ashworth, a minor noble's daughter, the seamstress, the woman who had been so publicly discarded by Joseph Hale, was arriving at his wedding feast with a lord on her arm. A powerful lord. An impressive lord, a lord who did not exist. Which was why I was now standing in a damp corridor, wearing my best gown, emerald silk, my own design, the one piece of clothing I owned that made me feel like I belonged in rooms like this, waiting for a hired companion from the most discreet establishment in the noble quarter. The companion hire house. I had gone there 4 days ago, hat pulled low, cloak drawn tight. Walking like a woman on her way to confession, which, in a spiritual sense, I suppose I was. The establishment was legitimate. Technically, it provided educated, well-dressed, charming men for court events, banquets, and social appearances. Technically respectable. Practically a woman going there alone signaled either desperation or scandal, and I was wearing both like perfume. I had selected a man from the house ledger, tall, well-spoken, trained in courtly manners, capable of holding a wine goblet without looking like he had stolen it. I had paid handsomely. I had given specific instructions: arrive at Ashworth Manor by the 7th evening bell, meet me in the servants' corridor behind the great hall, and for the love of all that is sacred, do not be late. The 7th bell had rung 10 minutes ago. He was late. I pressed my fingers to my temples. If I survive this night, I muttered, I am never lying again. I am never attending another luncheon. I am moving to a sheep farm in the northern hills and communicating exclusively through wool. The music swelled behind the doors. The feast was beginning. I could still remember the dress I had been wearing the day I found them. A blue linen day gown, nothing special, something I had sewn for myself between commissions. I had gone to Isadora's townhouse unannounced. We did that then because we were close. Because I trusted her the way you trust the ground beneath your feet, and the door was half open, and the house was quiet, and I walked in, and Joseph, on the settee, Isadora draped across him like she had been poured there. Joseph? He did not even have the grace to look ashamed. He sighed, actually sighed, as though I were an interruption to his afternoon. Zara, this was not going to last. My chest had tightened so hard I thought my ribs would crack. And Isadora, my Isadora, the girl I had shared every secret with since we were 12, looked at me with a small, satisfied smile and said the words that had lived in my chest like a splinter ever since. You have always been ordinary, Zara. You have always tried so hard, the perfect betrothed, the perfect friend, the reliable one. But you were never anything special. She tilted her head. No one is ever going to choose someone like you. You are only good for playing a supporting role in other people's lives. I stood there and I did not cry because I would not give her that. And I walked out of that house and I did not cry in the street and I did not cry in the carriage and I cried for 3 hours straight the moment I closed my bedroom door. That was 6 months ago, and the wound was still wet. So if I could not win at life, if I could not be chosen, if I could not be wanted, if I could not be the woman anyone stayed for, then at the very least, I would win at appearances. One night, one lie, one hired man who looked the part, and then I would go home and fall apart in private, the way I always did. A door opened at the far end of the corridor. I straightened, smoothed my gown, lifted my chin. A man stepped through, and every thought in my head evaporated like water on a forge. He was tall, not just tall commanding, the kind of height that made corridors feel smaller. He wore a dark coat, simple but immaculately cut, and he moved with the easy, unhurried confidence of a man who had never once in his life worried about being enough. His dark hair was slightly longer than fashion dictated, pushed back from a face that was, and I will not apologize for the accuracy of this observation, devastating. A strong jaw, a straight nose, gray-blue eyes that caught the torchlight and held it like a challenge. He looked like he had been carved by someone who wanted to ruin women's lives. My brain emptied. My feet moved before it could refill. I crossed the corridor in 4 steps, seized his arm, and pulled him toward me with the urgency of a woman who was already 15 minutes late to the most important performance of her life. You are late, I hissed. He frowned, not angry. Surprised, like a hawk that had just been grabbed by a sparrow. I beg your, no time. I tightened my grip on his arm and started walking. Here is what you need to. My name is Zara Ashworth. I am 25. My former fiancé and my former best friend are celebrating their wedding feast on the other side of those doors, and I need an impressive, powerful lord on my arm so I do not walk in there looking like the most pitiable woman in the kingdom. That is what I am paying you for. That is all I need you to do. Look noble, smile sparingly, and under no circumstances let go of my hand. He stared at me. His expression had shifted from confusion to something I could not read. His mouth curved not a smile, not yet, but the beginning of one, held back like a man deciding whether to let the joke land. And this impressive lord, he said, his voice low and unhurried, a voice built for stone halls and quiet rooms, would be me? Obviously, you are the one who showed up. I see. He looked down at where my fingers were clamped around his forearm like a vice, then back at my face. And the payment? Arranged through the house. Do not play games with me. I have had a very difficult month and I am not above causing a scene. Something shifted behind his eyes. I could not tell if it was amusement or curiosity or something else entirely, but he did not pull away. He did not correct me. He simply looked at me looked at me, the way no one had looked at me in 6 months, like I was not a problem to be solved or a failure to be pitied, but something worth paying attention to, and said, "Then lead the way." My heart did something unnecessary. I ignored it. "We need a name for you," I said as we walked. "A proper one, something that sounds like land and lineage." He raised an eyebrow. "You want to choose my name?" "I want to choose the name you give if anyone asks. This has to be convincing. I told Lady Pemberton you were a lord of considerable standing, so you cannot introduce yourself as I do not know Gerald from the lower market." That almost smile again. "Gerald, do not laugh at me. I am under enormous pressure. I can see that." I pulled a small folded paper from the inside of my sleeve, a list my childhood friend Marguerite had written for me. Noble houses with enough prestige to impress, but enough distance from the capital that no one would know every member by face. "Pick one," I said, unfolding it. He glanced at the list, and then he did something strange. He did not pick from the list. He looked at me with that steady, unreadable gaze and said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, "Kael of Thornwall." I blinked. "Thornwall? Is that on the list?" "No. Then why?" "Because it is a real name," he said simply, "and real names are harder to disprove." Before I could argue, the great hall doors swung open and there she was, Isadora, white gown, gold circlet, glowing like a woman who had gotten everything she wanted. Her eyes swept over me, then moved to the man at my side, and something shifted in her face, a flicker, not recognition but alarm, the particular expression of a woman who had expected to see a mouse and instead found something with teeth. "Zara," she said. Her voice was honey with a needle in it. "You came. I told you I would." Her eyes moved back to the man beside me, measured him, top to bottom and back again. "And this is—" He did not wait for me to answer. "Kael," he said. His voice carried the easy weight of a man who had introduced himself in great halls before. He inclined his head, not a bow, not quite, just enough to be courteous without conceding anything. "Of Thornwall." Isadora's lips parted. I did not know what Thornwall meant, but Isadora clearly did, and for the first time in 6 months, I watched fear cross her perfect face. Chapter 2. The wrong man. Isadora recovered fast, I will give her that. The flicker of alarm lasted barely a breath before her face reassembled itself into the porcelain mask of a woman who had spent her entire adult life controlling rooms. She smiled that particular smile, the one that looked warm from a distance and cut like a letter opener up close. "Thornwall," she repeated. The name sat in her mouth like something she was testing for poison. "How unexpected." "Most worthwhile things are," Kael said. He did not explain further. He did not elaborate or boast or fill the silence the way nervous men do. He simply stood there, his hand resting at the small of my back with an ease that suggested he had been standing beside me for years rather than minutes, and let the name do its own work. I had no idea what Thornwall meant, but I was not about to ask. "We should find our seats," I said brightly, gripping Kael's arm and steering him toward the great hall before Isadora could ask anything else. "The feast will not serve itself." Isadora's eyes followed us. I could feel them on my back like 2 small, elegant daggers. The great hall of Ashworth Manor had been transformed for the occasion. Long oak tables draped in white linen, candelabras dripping with beeswax, garlands of late autumn roses, Isadora's signature, naturally wound along every beam. The room smelled of roasted game, fresh bread, spiced wine, and the particular fragrance of 200 people trying to outperform each other in a confined space. Joseph stood at the head table. I had not looked at him yet, not properly. I had been too focused on Isadora, too focused on the lie, too focused on the man beside me whose arm felt alarmingly solid beneath my fingers. But now, crossing the hall, I could not avoid it. Joseph Hale. He looked the same. That was the cruelest part. The same dark hair, the same easy smile, the same way of standing with his hands loosely clasped like a man who had never once been uncomfortable in his own skin. He was wearing a ceremonial coat of deep blue, his house color, and he looked handsome and confident and completely unbothered by the fact that 6 months ago he had shattered my life like a glass he had simply dropped. He saw me. His eyebrows rose just slightly, just enough for me to catch. His gaze swept over me, then over Kael, and something complicated moved behind his eyes. Not jealousy, not yet, but surprise. The particular surprise of a man who had left something behind and expected it to stay where he put it. Zara, he inclined his head as we approached. You came. You invited me, I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. His eyes moved to Kael, measured him. I watched Joseph's jaw tighten, a small, involuntary thing as he took in the height, the bearing, the quiet authority that rolled off Kael like heat from a forge. And you are her betrothed, Kael said, simply, without flourish, like it was a fact no more remarkable than the weather. Joseph blinked. A ripple of whispers moved through the nearest tables. I could feel the room recalibrating, the minor noble's daughter, the abandoned seamstress, walking into her former fiancé's wedding feast on the arm of a man who looked like he had been assembled specifically to make every other man in the room feel inadequate. Betrothed, Joseph repeated. His smile thinned. That is recent. Is it? Kael tilted his head. The gesture was mild, almost friendly, but something in his eyes was not friendly at all. You seem very interested in the timeline. Joseph's smile stiffened. I had the sudden, irrational urge to laugh, not because it was funny, because it was working. The lie was working. Joseph was rattled, the room was watching, and the man beside me was performing the role of devoted lord so effortlessly that for a disorienting moment, I almost forgot it was not real. Almost. Come, I said, tugging Kael's arm. I want wine. We found seats at a table near the center of the hall, close enough to be visible, far enough from the head table that I did not have to look at Isadora glowing in her white gown like a candle I wanted to snuff. The moment we sat, I became aware of several things simultaneously. First, Kael smelled extraordinary, not like perfume, like wood smoke and leather and something clean underneath, like cold river water. I should not have been noticing this. I was noticing it very much. Second, his thigh was pressed against mine beneath the table, because the benches were narrow and he was large, and the heat of it was deeply distracting in a way I refused to acknowledge. Third, he was watching me. Not the room, not the other guests, not the spectacle of the feast. Me, with those gray-blue eyes that seemed to catch every flicker of torchlight and hold it, steady and patient, like a man who had all the time in the world and had chosen to spend it paying attention to one specific thing. Stop that, I murmured, reaching for my goblet. Stop what? Looking at me like that. Like what? Like you are seeing me. The corner of his mouth lifted. Would you prefer I look at you like everyone else does? I did not ask what he meant by that. I was afraid of the answer. A servant filled our goblets. The wine was good, deep and rich, the color of garnets. I drank more of it than was strictly wise, because the alternative was sitting in silence next to a man who made my pulse behave in ways my pulse had no business behaving. You are doing well, Kael said quietly, as the first course was laid before us. I am barely breathing. That is what I mean. Most people would have crumbled by now. I looked at him. Is that supposed to be a compliment? It is an observation. He picked up his goblet with those steady, unhurried hands that wrapped around the stem with a kind of quiet authority, as if the goblet had been waiting for him specifically, and I found myself wondering what those hands would feel like against my... The venison looks excellent, I said loudly, and stabbed a piece of meat with my knife. He watched me assault the venison with an expression that suggested he knew exactly what I had been thinking and was choosing, graciously, not to comment on it. I hated him. The first hour of the feast passed in a blur of courses, toasts, and the low hum of 200 conversations happening simultaneously. Kael played his part with an ease that unnerved me. He spoke when addressed briefly, precisely, revealing nothing while somehow giving the impression of revealing everything. When Lord Ashton asked about his holdings, Kael mentioned northern interests with a vagueness that somehow sounded more impressive than specificity. When Lady Pemberton asked how we met, he looked at me with an expression of such genuine warmth that my stomach flipped over. She seized my arm in a corridor, he said, and told me she needed me. Lady Pemberton sighed romantically. I kicked him under the table. He did not flinch. The trouble began during the third course. Isadora had been circulating the room, the bride making her rounds, accepting congratulations with a grace that made my teeth ache. I tracked her in my peripheral vision the way one tracks a hawk in an open field. She reached our table eventually. Of course she did. "Zara, darling." She placed a hand on my shoulder, light, familiar, as though we were still friends, as though she had not carved me open 6 months ago and left me bleeding on her drawing room floor. "I am so pleased you are enjoying the feast." "It is lovely," I said. My smile was a masterwork of civil engineering. "And your companion?" She turned those calculating eyes on Kael. "Thornwall? I confess I cannot place you. I thought I knew every notable house within 2 weeks' ride of the capital." "Perhaps you do not ride far enough," Kael said pleasantly. Isadora's smile sharpened. "The Thornwall name is known in certain circles, but I have never seen you at court. Not at the spring levee, not at the harvest ball, not at any gathering of note in the past. Oh, I would say 15 years at least." My blood chilled. She was testing him, probing for the gap in the armor, the place where the lie would crack. Kael, however, did not crack. 15 years, he repeated as though the number amused him. "That is very precise for someone who claims not to know me." Something flickered in Isadora's expression, not fear exactly, but caution. The look of a woman who had reached into a bush expecting a rabbit and felt teeth instead. "I merely find it curious," she said, recovering smoothly. "A man of your apparent stature, and yet no one in our circle has heard of you. I was not aware your circle was the measure of all things." I nearly choked on my wine. Isadora's composure held, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers pressed a fraction too hard against my shoulder before she lifted her hand. "Well," she said, her voice silky, "I do hope we will see more of you both. Zara, you must come for tea this week. We have so much to catch up on." She floated away before I could respond. I exhaled. "She suspects something," I whispered once she was out of earshot. "She suspects everything," Kael corrected calmly. "That is her nature." I looked at him. "How would you know her nature? You met her 20 minutes ago." He took a slow sip of wine. "Some people announce themselves the moment they enter a room. She announced herself before she even spoke." I wanted to argue. I wanted to point out that he was a hired companion playing a role, not a scholar of human behavior. But the unsettling thing was he was right. Isadora had always been like that, even when we were girls, even when she was my closest friend. She'd always been watching, always calculating, always 3 steps ahead in a game no one else knew they were playing. And she had played me best of all. The ache returned, that familiar cold pressure behind my ribs that never fully went away. I stared at my goblet and did not drink. "She told me once," I said quietly, before I could stop myself, "that I would always be a supporting character in other people's lives. I do not know why I said it. I had not meant to. The wine, perhaps, the candlelight, the strange disarming effect of sitting next to a man who listened like listening was something that required his full attention." Kael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She told you that because she needed you to believe it." I looked up. His eyes were steady, not pitying, not soft, something harder and more honest than either. "People who are truly extraordinary," he said, "do not need to convince others that they are ordinary." The words landed somewhere deep, somewhere I had not been touched in months. My throat tightened, and I had to look away before the burning behind my eyes became something I could not explain to a room full of people. "You are very good at this," I managed. The reassurance, the earnest gaze. Is that part of the standard companion package, or did I pay extra without realizing? He smiled, but it was not his usual smile, the one edged with amusement. This one was quieter, almost sad. You should eat, he said. The next course is arriving and you have barely touched your plate. I am not hungry. You are. You are just too stubborn to admit it. I picked up my fork and ate because he was right and because arguing with a man who saw through me this clearly was exhausting. The feast wore on. Music rose, a quartet of lutes and a singer whose voice filled the vaulted ceiling like warm honey. Couples began to move toward the center of the hall, where the dancing would begin. Joseph approached. I saw him coming from across the room, that easy, confident stride, the smile that had once made my heart sing and now made it clench like a fist. He was coming toward our table, toward me. Zara. He stopped in front of us. His eyes moved between me and Kael with something I could not quite name. Would you honor me with a dance, for old time's sake? Every muscle in my body tensed. Before I could answer, Kael's hand settled on my knee beneath the table. Not possessive, not restraining, just present. A silent acknowledgement that I was not alone. I think, Kael said, his voice smiled but carrying a weight that made Joseph straighten slightly, that my betrothed would prefer to dance with me. He rose, offered me his hand. I took it. His fingers closed around mine, warm, certain, unhurried, and he led me to the center of the hall as the music shifted into something slower. His hand settled at my waist. My hand found his shoulder, and we moved. He could dance. Of course he could dance. This man, this impossible, infuriating man, danced with the same quiet confidence he did everything else, as though he had been trained for it, as though his body understood rhythm the way other men understood breathing. He led without pushing. He held without gripping. The pressure of his hand at my waist was light enough to be courteous and firm enough to be felt in every nerve I possessed. I was suddenly acutely aware of how close we were, his chest against mine, his breath near my temple, the line of his jaw from this angle severe, clean, shadowed by the candlelight in a way that made me think thoughts I had no business thinking in a crowded hall. You are trembling, he murmured. I am not. Your hand is shaking. That is rage. I am furious at you for volunteering me to dance before I could refuse Joseph myself. Are you? Incandescent. You do not look incandescent. You look... He paused, studied me with those impossible eyes, relieved. I said nothing because he was right, and I would rather have swallowed my own tongue than admit it. We turned. Across the hall I caught Joseph watching us. His expression was no longer surprised. It was something raw, something that looked, if I squinted, almost like regret. Good. Let him regret. Let him watch me in the arms of a man who held me like I was not a burden to be managed or a problem to be solved, but something worth holding carefully, even if the man was hired, even if the arms were rented, even if tomorrow I would be back in my small room above my parents' house, sewing gowns for women who had the lives I had lost, crying into my pillow like the pathetic, discarded, ordinary woman Isadora had told me I was. For tonight, I was not that woman. For tonight I was chosen. The music swelled. Kael's hand tightened at my waist just slightly, just enough. Do not look at him, he said quietly. I was not. You were, and he does not deserve it. I swallowed hard. You do not know what he deserves. I know what you deserve, he said, and it is not a man who let you go. The words hit me like a fist wrapped in silk. My vision blurred. For one terrible, mortifying moment, I was certain I was going to cry in the middle of a wedding feast, in the arms of a hired companion, in front of every person I had ever known. I blinked it back. Barely. You are very convincing, I whispered. If I did not know better, I would think you meant that. He looked at me for a long moment. The torchlight caught his eyes, gray and blue, and something else, something I could not name. Who says I do not? My heart lurched. I did not answer. I could not answer. Because the honest truth, The truth I would not have admitted under pain of death was that I wanted him to mean it. I wanted it so badly that the wanting itself frightened me. So I did what I always did. I sharpened. "The song is ending," I said briskly. "We should return to the table before Isadora starts circulating again. She has been watching us dance like a woman cataloging evidence." He released me, slowly, like a man setting down something he was not ready to put down. "As you wish," he said. We returned to our seats. I drank more wine. He watched me drink it with an expression that suggested he was filing away every single thing I did for future reference, which was absurd. There would be no future reference. After tonight, I would pay him and he would leave and I would never see him again, and that would be that, and the memory of his hand at my waist would fade eventually, probably, hopefully, in a decade or two. "Stop looking at me," I said. "You keep saying that, because you keep doing it." "Perhaps," he said, "you are worth looking at." I grabbed a bread roll and bit into it like it had personally offended me. The feast continued. The night deepened, and somewhere across the hall Isadora whispered something to Joseph, and both of them turned to look at us with expressions I could not read. Something was coming. I did not know what. But the way Isadora's eyes lingered on Kael, calculating, suspicious, hungry for a weakness she had not yet found, told me that this night was far from over. Chapter 3. The Feast. The dessert course arrived, and with it, trouble. Isadora moved through the hall like a woman on a campaign. She had changed her approach. I could see it in the way she laughed too brightly with Lady Pemberton, leaned too close to Lord Ashton's wife, touched too many arms. She was collecting. Every whisper, every glance, every murmured question about the tall stranger at Zara Ashworth's side, she was gathering them like kindling. I knew this because I had watched her do it before, to other people. I had even helped once, back when I believed we were friends, back when I thought her sharpness was cleverness and her cruelty was honesty, and her habit of cataloging other people's weaknesses was simply her way of understanding the world. I had been so stupid. "She is making rounds," I murmured to Kael, watching Isadora pause at a table of minor lords. "Asking about you." He did not look up from his wine. Let her ask. "You do not understand. Isadora does not ask idle questions. She asks questions the way a hunter sets snares to see what stumbles into them. Then she will find her snares empty." I stared at him. "How can you be so calm?" He finally looked at me, those steady eyes, patient as stone, "because she cannot find what does not exist." What does that mean? It means I am not lying about who I am. You are a hired companion pretending to be my betrothed lord. That is definitionally a lie. Something shifted in his expression, brief, almost imperceptible, like a door opening and closing in the same breath. "Is it?" Before I could interrogate that deeply unhelpful response, a woman appeared at our table. She was young, sharp-eyed, and wearing the Hale House colors, which meant she was one of Joseph's cousins or relations the wedding party was crawling with them. "Forgive the interruption," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Lady Isadora asked me to extend an invitation. She is hosting a private toast in the upper gallery, just the wedding party and close friends. She would be delighted if you both would join." A trap. Obviously a trap. The upper gallery was smaller, more intimate, harder to hide in. Isadora wanted us in a confined space where she could probe without the buffer of 200 guests and a lute quartet. "We would be honored," Kael said, before I could refuse. I turned to him with an expression that I hoped communicated, "Are you insane?" without requiring me to say it aloud. He leaned close. His breath was warm against my ear, and every nerve in my body paid attention in a way that was entirely inappropriate for the circumstances. "If you refuse," he murmured, "she will know you are afraid, and afraid people are hiding something." "I am hiding something. I am hiding the fact that my betrothed is a man I hired from a house of companions less than a week ago." "Then hide it better." He pulled back and smiled, that slow, devastating smile that I was beginning to suspect was a weapon he deployed with full knowledge of its effect. You have been doing beautifully so far. My face flushed. I did not know if it was anger or something worse. We followed Joseph's cousin up a narrow stone staircase to the upper gallery, a long candlelit room with arched windows overlooking the courtyard below. A fire crackled in a massive hearth. Wine had been laid out on a sideboard, and a small cluster of people were already gathered. Joseph, Isadora, Lady Pemberton, Lord Ashton, and a handful of others I recognized from the capital's social circuits. Isadora stood by the hearth, goblet in hand, glowing in the firelight like a painting of a woman who knew she was being watched. Zara, she beckoned us closer. Come, sit. I want to hear everything about this whirlwind romance. You have been so secretive. I settled into a chair near the fire, and Kael took the seat beside me close, his knee touching mine in a way that I told myself was strategic and my body insisted was personal. There is not much to tell, I said lightly. We met, we fell, here we are. How poetic. Isadora tilted her head. But surely there are details. How does a seamstress from the noble quarter come to be betrothed to a lord of Thornwall? The word seamstress landed exactly as she intended, like a small, precise demotion. Not a gown maker, not a designer. A seamstress. She wanted to remind everyone in the room exactly where I stood in the hierarchy. The same way anyone meets anyone, I said, by being in the right place at the right time. Or the wrong place, Joseph added with a smile I could not decode. He was watching Kael with an expression caught between curiosity and something sharper. Thornwall is quite remote, is it not? I confess I have never been. Few have, Kael said. That is rather the point. And your family? Lord Ashton leaned forward. I knew a Thornwall years ago at the Highland Courts. Stern man, military bearing, is that a relation? I held my breath. Kael did not hesitate. My father's brother, he passed some years ago. Ah, yes, a shame. Good family, though, old blood. I exhaled silently. Kael had navigated that without a single tell. Either he was the most talented liar I had ever met, or... No, I was not going to finish that thought. Isadora, however, was not satisfied. She circled the conversation the way a cat circles a mouse patient, unhurried, waiting for the moment of vulnerability. I find it fascinating, she said, settling into the chair across from us, that you appeared so suddenly, no announcement, no courtship anyone noticed, no introduction at any social gathering. It is almost as though you materialized out of thin air. Some things, Kael said, are better conducted in private. How convenient, how accurate. Their eyes met. I watched it happen, a silent collision, two people who recognized each other's sharpness and were deciding how much of it to show. Isadora's smile did not waver, but her fingers tightened around her goblet. Kael's expression did not change at all, which was somehow more unsettling. Tell me, Isadora said softly, leaning forward. What was it about Zara that captured you? I am curious because I have known her for many years and I confess she can be rather reserved. The word reserved was code. I knew it. She knew it. She meant boring. She meant ordinary. She meant the kind of woman men settle for, not the kind they pursue. My nails dug into my palms beneath the table. Kael turned to look at me. Not at Isadora, at me, and the look on his face was I do not have a word for it. It was not performed. It was not the charming, calibrated expression of a man playing a role. It was something quieter, something that made me feel like the room had emptied and we were alone and he was seeing every crack in me and choosing to stay anyway. She does not perform, he said, still looking at me, in a world full of people who curate every word, every smile, every gesture to achieve an effect she does not. She is exactly who she is, and she has no idea how rare that makes her. The room went quiet. My heart stopped, then started again, too fast, too loud, and I was grateful for the firelight because my face was burning. Isadora's smile had frozen, not dropped frozen, like a painting left unfinished. "How lovely," she managed. "I needed air. I needed to think. I needed to be somewhere that was not this room, with this man saying things like that with those eyes." "Excuse me," I said, rising. "I need a moment." I left the gallery before anyone could stop me, walked down the corridor until I found a quiet alcove near a window, and pressed my forehead against the cool stone. Breathe, breathe. He did not mean it. He was performing. He was doing what I paid him to do, making me look desirable, making the lie convincing, making Isadora choke on her own cruelty. That was all. But the way he had looked at me, the way his voice had gone quiet when he said she does not perform, the way he had turned to me, not to the audience, as though his answer was not for them at all. I pressed my hands flat against the stone and closed my eyes and imagined just for a moment, just one treacherous, undisciplined moment, what it would feel like if he meant it. If a man like that looked at a woman like me and saw what he claimed to see. If those hands, steady, unhurried, hands that held goblets and offered arms and rested at the small of backs with the casual precision of someone who understood exactly how much pressure to apply if those hands were to. Zara. My eyes snapped open. He was standing at the end of the alcove, torchlight behind him, turning him into a silhouette and a voice. "You left quickly," he said. "I needed air. You needed distance. Same thing." He stepped closer, not crowding, just present. The way he had been present all evening, taking up space without demanding it, which was somehow more disruptive than if he had. "You are angry with me," he said. "I am not angry with you. You are angry with me for saying something true in front of someone who has spent 6 months making you believe it is a lie." I stared at him. My chest ached. "You do not know me well enough to say what is true about me. I know that you walked into your former fiancé's wedding feast with your chin up and your hands shaking, and you did not falter once. I know that Isadora has tried to break you 3 times tonight and you have not broken. I know that the only time you came close to tears was when someone said something kind to you, which tells me kindness is the thing you have been denied longest." I could not speak. "And I know," he said, quieter now, "that you keep asking me to stop looking at you, but you have not once asked me to leave." The silence stretched between us like a held breath. "We should go back," I whispered. "Before Isadora notices we are both gone." He watched me for one more moment, patient, steady, seeing everything, and then nodded. "After you." We returned to the gallery. The toast happened, goblets were raised, platitudes were offered, and Isadora glowed, and Joseph smiled, and the whole room pretended that this was a celebration and not a battlefield. I sat beside Kael and did not look at him and felt every inch of air between us like it was charged with something I was not ready to name. The feast ended late. Guests began to disperse, some to carriages, some to guest chambers in the manor. The candles burned low, the music faded, and eventually the great hall emptied of everyone except the servants clearing plates and the ghosts of conversations that would fuel gossip for weeks. Kael and I stood in the entrance hall. The night air leaked through the open doors, cold and sharp with autumn. "Well," I said, smoothing my gown and straightening my shoulders and performing composure with every ounce of skill I possessed. "That was you were adequate. Thank you. I will arrange payment through the house." He looked at me with an expression I could not read. "Adequate," he repeated. "Above adequate. Commendable, even. You were very convincing, and I appreciate your professionalism." "My professionalism. Stop repeating everything I say. Stop saying things you do not mean." I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I mean all of it. You did your job. The night is over. We are finished." He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Where are you staying tonight?" "I what? You came by carriage?" "I walked. The manor is only... You are not walking alone through the city quarter at this hour. I have walked these streets my entire life. I do not need... I did not say you needed. I passed where you are staying." I huffed. "My parents' house. It is a 20-minute walk. I will be perfectly." "The manor has guest chambers." He said it like a fact, not a suggestion. Several are still available. It would be safer. I'm not staying in a guest chamber at my ex-fiancé's wedding venue. Then I will walk you home. You absolutely will not. Then I will follow you home from 30 paces behind, which will look significantly more suspicious. I stared at him. He stared back, immovable. You are the most infuriating man I have ever met, I said. I have been told. I wanted to argue further. I wanted to storm off into the night and prove that I did not need him or anyone. But the truth, the small, embarrassing truth, was that the streets were dark, and I was tired, and the wine had made me unsteady. And the thought of walking home alone through unlit alleys after this night felt like one more thing I did not have the strength for. Fine, I said. The guest chamber. One night, and then we are done. Done, he agreed. He did not sound like he meant it. Chapter 4. East Tower of Ashworth Manor, up a spiral staircase, past a landing that smelled of dried lavender and old wood, through a heavy oak door that groaned when it opened. It was a beautiful room. I hated admitting that, but it was. A canopied bed with deep green curtains, a fireplace already lit, the flames low and golden. A copper bathing tub in the far corner, already filled steam, curling off the surface like a whispered invitation. A window that overlooked the manor gardens, where the last of the autumn roses were silver in the moonlight. Of course, Isadora's wedding venue had beautiful guest chambers. Of course. This is more than I expected, I said, stepping inside. Kael leaned against the doorframe, watching me take in the room. I will be across the hall, he said. If you need anything. I will not need anything. I know. He pushed off the doorframe and turned to leave. Wait. The word left me before my brain approved it. He stopped, looked back. I stood in the middle of the room, my shoes already kicked off, my hair half falling from its pins, the last shreds of my composure unraveling like cheap thread. I did not know what I wanted to say. I did not know why I had stopped him. No, that was a lie. I knew. I was terrified of being alone. Not because of the dark or the unfamiliar room or any rational fear. Because the moment he left, the performance would be over, and I would be just Zara again, the Zara who had been discarded and humiliated and told she was ordinary, and the silence would rush in and fill every corner, and I would lie in that beautiful bed and cry the way I did every night, quietly, into my pillow, where no one could hear. Stay, I said. The word hung in the air. He studied me. I could see him deciding, weighing something behind those careful eyes. Are you certain? Do not make me ask twice. I am not good at it. He stepped back into the room, closed the door. The latch clicked with a finality that made my pulse jump. I am not, I started, then stopped, tried again. I do not mean this is not. I know, he said, calmly, like he understood exactly what I was struggling to articulate, that I wanted company, not performance, presence, not pretense. He crossed to the armchair by the fire and sat down, stretched his long legs out, looked at the flames. Tell me something, he said, that has nothing to do with tonight. I blinked. What? Something ordinary, something from your life before all of this. I sat on the edge of the bed, tucking my legs underneath me, and tried to think of something that was not contaminated by Joseph or Isadora or the last 6 months of misery. I make gowns, I said. I know. No, I mean that is not just what I do, it is what I am. I have been making things since I was a girl. My mother taught me to sew before I could properly hold a needle. I used to steal scraps from her work basket and make dresses for my dolls, terrible, lopsided, glorious things. I thought they were magnificent. I paused, smiling despite myself. I still think they were magnificent. He was watching me. Not the way he had watched me in the hall, carefully, strategically. This was different. This was a man listening because he wanted to. And now? He asked. Now I make gowns for noblewomen in the capital quarter. Wedding gowns, court gowns, festival gowns. Women with money and taste and no idea that the hands sewing their silks belong to someone who goes home to a room above her parents' kitchen and eats leftover stew for supper. You say that like it shames you. It does not shame me. I pulled at a thread on the bed cover. It disappoints me. I had plans once, a shop of my own, a name that meant something in the gown trade. I was going to build something. And then Joseph happened, and the plans fell apart, and I moved back home, and now I sew other women's dreams and try not to think about how mine unraveled. Kael was quiet for a moment. What was the most beautiful gown you ever made? The question surprised me, not because it was difficult, but because no one had ever asked it. Not Joseph, not Isadora, not anyone. A winter gown, I said, and the memory surfaced warm and bright. For Lady Voss's daughter. White velvet with silver thread, I embroidered it myself, every stitch, working by candlelight for 3 weeks. The thread caught the light like frost on glass. When she wore it to the winter ball, 3 women asked for my name. I paused. That was the closest I ever came to feeling like I was becoming who I was supposed to be. He looked at me, and something in his expression made the room feel smaller, warmer. You will get there, he said. You cannot possibly know that. I know what I see. You see a woman sitting on a bed in a borrowed room after a night spent pretending her life is not in ruins. That is not exactly a portrait of potential. It is exactly a portrait of potential, he said. Ruins are where the most interesting things get built. I stared at him. My throat was tight. Something behind my ribs was shifting a wall I had built very carefully over 6 months. Brick by careful brick was developing a crack I had not authorized. Why are you being kind to me? I asked. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. You have done your job. The night is over. You do not need to keep performing, he finished. Yes. He leaned forward in the chair. Firelight moved across his face, catching the hard line of his jaw, the scar I had not noticed before thin, just above his left eyebrow, barely visible. What if I am not performing? The question sat between us, heavy, dangerous. Then you are a fool, I whispered, because I am a seamstress from a minor house with no fortune, no influence, and a track record of choosing people who leave. I am still here. The night is not over yet. He smiled, not the charming smile, not the disarming one, a real smile, small and private, like something he had not meant to show. No, he said, it is not. The fire crackled. The steam from the bathing tub curled toward the ceiling, soft and inviting, and something reckless took root in me, the same impulse that had driven me to the companion hire house, the same mad courage that had made me grab a stranger's arm in a corridor. Except this time it was not desperation. It was want. I stood from the bed. My fingers found the laces at the back of my gown, the emerald silk, my best work, the armor I had worn into battle tonight, and I pulled. The laces loosened. The fabric shifted. I felt the cool tower air brush the skin of my shoulders as the gown slipped just slightly, just enough. Kael went very still. What are you doing? His voice was lower now, rougher at the edges, like something had scraped the smoothness off it. The bath is drawn, I said, as though this were the most rational explanation in the world. And I have had a very long night, and I'm not going to let perfectly good hot water go to waste simply because there is a man in the room. Zara, turn around if it bothers you. He did not turn around. I let the gown fall. It pooled at my feet in a whisper of silk emerald against the dark stone floor, catching the firelight like a fallen flag. Beneath it, my shift was thin. Linen, white, leaving very little to the imagination in the warm glow of the flames. His eyes moved over me. Not quickly, slowly, with the deliberate attention of a man who understood exactly what he was looking at and was choosing not to look away. His gaze traced the line of my shoulders, the curve of my waist, the place where the linen clung to my hips. I felt his gaze like a physical thing, like fingertips. Well, I said, stepping toward the tub with more confidence than I felt. My heart was hammering so hard I was certain he could hear it. Are you going to sit there all night? That depends. On what? On whether you are inviting me because you want company or because you want me. The question landed like a blade laid flat on a table. Not threatening, just honest. And suddenly, all the clever words, all the sharp deflections, all the armor I had been wearing since the corridor, none of it was enough to hide the truth. Both, I said, and my voice did not shake. I was proud of that. Something shifted in his eyes. The patience was still there, it was always there, but beneath it, a heat I had not seen before. A hunger he had been holding back all night, leashed so carefully I had almost missed it. He rose from the chair, my breath caught. He moved toward me with the same unhurried confidence he brought to everything, the walk, the conversation, the dance, except now there was an edge to it, a current running underneath the calm surface, and I could feel it pulling at me the way deep water pulls. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that the warmth of his body mixed with the warmth of the steam, close enough that I could see the pulse beating in his throat, steady but faster than before. "If you want me to stop," he said, his voice low, barely above a murmur, "say the word, at any point, and I will stop." "I know," I said, because I did. Something in this man, something fundamental, something that lived in his bones, was incapable of taking what was not offered. I had known it since the corridor, since the moment he let me drag him into a ballroom without protest, not because he was passive, but because he had decided my choice mattered more than his comfort. "Good," he said. And then his hand, that steady, unhurried, infuriating hand, reached up and brushed a strand of damp hair from my face. His fingers trailed along my temple, down the line of my jaw, feather-light, impossibly gentle, like he was handling something precious. A sound left my throat small, involuntary, embarrassingly honest. His eyes darkened. "Zara, do not say my name like that." "Like what?" "Like it means something." "It does mean something." And then he kissed me, not the way I expected, not hard, not urgent, not the collision I had braced myself for. It was slow, devastatingly slow. His mouth found mine with the same patience he brought to everything, tasting, learning, savoring, like a man who had waited a very long time for this exact moment and was not about to rush it. His hand slid from my jaw to the back of my neck, fingers threading into my hair, cradling my head as he deepened the kiss. His other hand settled at my waist, warm through the thin linen, solid, grounding, and pulled me closer. Not roughly, just enough that the space between us disappeared entirely, and I felt the full length of him pressed against me, the heat, the strength, the tension coiled in every muscle. I made a sound against his mouth that I would deny to my grave. He smiled into the kiss. The bastard. My hands, which had been hanging uselessly at my sides because my brain had stopped sending instructions to my limbs, finally found purchase. I grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him closer, pulled him harder, pulled him until there was nothing between us but linen and want. He broke the kiss. Just barely. His forehead rested against mine, his breathing uneven for the first time all night. "The bath," he murmured. "You said something about a bath." "I'd changed my mind about the bath." "Did you?" "The bath can wait." Something flickered in his expression, desire, tenderness, wonder all braided together in a way that made my stomach flip. He studied me for one more breath, reading me the way he always read me, looking for hesitation, looking for doubt. He found none. His hands moved to my waist, and he lifted me effortlessly, one arm beneath my thighs, the other across my back, like I weighed nothing, and the ease of it, the casual, unhurried strength, sent a pulse of heat through me so sharp I gasped. My legs wrapped around his waist without conscious thought. My arms locked around his neck, and his mouth found that spot below my ear, the one I did not know existed until his lips touched it, and he kissed it, and scraped his teeth along the curve of my neck, and the sound I made was not dignified, and I did not care. "You are trembling," he murmured against my skin. "I am not. You are." He smiled. I felt it against my neck. "I like it. I hate you." He carried me to the bed. The canopy above us was dark green, the color of forests. of hidden places, of things that grew in the dark. He laid me down with a gentleness that contradicted the hunger in his eyes, and then he was beside me, and his hands were in my hair, and his mouth was on mine, and the kiss that had started slow was no longer slow. It was the kiss underneath, the patience, the one he had been holding back since the corridor, since the dance, since the moment I grabbed his arm and he decided not to pull away. Deep and demanding and tasting of wine and want and the particular urgency of two people who had been alone for too long. His hands explored the dip of my waist through the linen, the curve of my hip, the bare skin of my shoulder where the shift had slipped. Every touch was deliberate, unhurried, precise, like a man who understood patience the way other men understood swordsmanship and was now applying every lesson he had ever learned. I pulled at his shirt. He obliged it was gone in a breath, and my hands were on his chest, and dear God, if I thought he looked good in a coat, shirtless was catastrophic. Golden skin stretched over muscle that had been built by 15 years of Highland training, not decorative, not vain, but powerful, earned. Scars crossed his torso, thin white lines, each one a story I wanted to learn. My fingers traced one that curved along his ribs, and I felt his stomach tighten under my touch. "You are staring," he murmured. "I am assessing." "And?" "The assessment is favorable." He caught my hand against his chest, held it there. I could feel his heart beating under my palm, fast, strong, nothing like the measured patience he wore on the surface. His heart was telling the truth, his face would not. He was as undone as I was. The realization made me braver. I pulled him closer. His body settled against mine, warm, solid, overwhelming in the best possible way, and his mouth traced a path from my lips to my jaw to the hollow of my throat, and every nerve I possessed rearranged itself around his touch. "Kael, tell me what you want," he murmured against my collarbone. I could not finish the sentence, because what I wanted was too large, too terrifying, too honest to say aloud. I wanted to be chosen. I wanted to be wanted. I wanted to feel for one night like I was not replaceable. I did not have to say it. He already knew. His mouth found mine again, and his hands cradled my face like I was the only real thing in the room, and I stopped thinking entirely. What happened next belonged to the firelight and the dark. It was not rushed. It was not performance. It was two people who had been carrying loneliness like a second skin, peeling it away piece by piece, touch by touch, until there was nothing left between them but honesty. He was patient, and then he was not. He was gentle, and then he was something else, something fierce and raw and reverent all at once, like a man who had forgotten what it meant to hold someone and was remembering it in real time, with his whole body, with every breath. And I, the woman who had been told she was boring, ordinary, forgettable, I was none of those things. Not in his hands, not in this room, not tonight. Afterward, the tower was quiet. The fire had burned low embers glowing amber and gold, painting the room in warm shadows. The sheets were tangled around us. My head rested on his chest, rising and falling with his breathing. His arm was around me, his fingers tracing absent, lazy patterns along my bare shoulder, the kind of touch that was not going anywhere, the kind that existed simply because he could not stop. I lay there, boneless and shattered and more awake than I had felt in 6 months. "You are thinking again," he murmured. His voice was rougher now, undone. Nothing like the controlled, patient man who had walked into a corridor. This was the man underneath. "I am always thinking. Think quieter. You are keeping me awake." I smiled despite myself, then felt it fade, because the warmth was real, and his arm around me was real, and the way he had touched me with reverence and hunger and a patience that felt like it had been building for years was real. But the arrangement was not. I was paying him. He was performing. Tomorrow I would be back in my small room above my parents' kitchen, crying into my pillow, and he would be off to the next woman who needed a beautiful lie. Best arrangement I have ever made, I thought, then hated myself for it, because the word arrangement opened a hole in my chest that all the firelight in the world could not fill. His lips pressed to my temple, slowly, sweetly. with a tenderness that did not match what I had just experienced, or rather, it matched perfectly, and that was worse. "Tell me something," I said quietly. "Something real, something that is not part of this arrangement." He was quiet for a long time. His fingers moved through my hair, slow, deliberate, tracing patterns I could not see. "I have not been with anyone," he said, "in a very long time." I lifted my head, looked at him. In the dying firelight, his expression was stripped of everything: the charm, the confidence, the easy control. He looked almost vulnerable, almost young. "How long?" Long enough that I had forgotten what it felt like to be touched by someone who was not trying to train me, test me, or prepare me for something. My chest ached. I lowered my head back to his chest. "I had forgotten, too," I said, "what it felt like to be touched by someone who was not comparing me to someone else." His hand stilled in my hair, then resumed. Slower, more deliberate, like he was making a point. "You are incomparable," he said. "For the record, you are alarmingly good at this." "At what?" "At making me forget that you are a hired companion, and I'm paying you to say exactly this." A breath of silence, then very quietly, "What if you are not?" I did not ask what he meant. I was afraid of the answer. Instead, I closed my eyes and pressed myself closer to the warmth of him, and listened to his heartbeat, and let the fire burn low and the tower grow quiet, and the night settle over us like a promise. Sleep pulled at me, heavy, warm, inevitable. His fingers moved through my hair. His breath was steady against my temple, and just before sleep took me, I heard him speak. His voice was low, barely more than a breath. He said it the way people say things they are not ready to say aloud, testing the shape of the words, releasing them into the dark to see if they survive. I caught only the end. "And you are nothing like they told you." I wanted to open my eyes. I wanted to ask what he meant, who they were, whether he was still performing, or whether this was the first honest thing he had said all night. But sleep was faster than my questions. I woke slowly. Morning light filtered through the tower window, pale and golden, catching the dust motes floating in the air. For a moment, I did not remember where I was. The bed was too soft. The sheets smelled of wood smoke and leather and something warm that made my body tighten with memory before my mind caught up. Then the night came back, the feast, the lie, the dance, his hands on my skin, his mouth against my throat, the way he had whispered my name like a man coming undone, and I rolled over, reaching for the warmth that should have been beside me. The bed was empty. I sat up. The sheets were tangled. My gown lay where it had fallen, emerald silk pooled on the stone floor like a flag of surrender. His shirt was gone. The fire had burned to ash. The bathing tub sat untouched and cold. And the space beside me, the space where a man had held me against his chest and breathed things into the dark I could not quite hear, was nothing but rumpled linen and the fading ghost of warmth. He was gone. Not even a sweet farewell. Not even a lingering morning look. Not even a whispered goodbye. No, wait. Something on the small table beside the armchair. A piece of parchment. Folded once. No seal. I crossed the room, pulling the sheet around me, and opened it. "The companion you hired arrived at the manor last night. He was turned away at the gate because no one had arranged his entrance. He left at the 9th bell. I was never him. Kay, I read it 3 times. My hands were shaking. I sat down in the chair, his chair, still carrying the faintest impression of him, and read it a 4th time. I was never him. The companion I had hired, the actual companion, from the companion hire house, had come. He had arrived. He had been turned away at the gate while I was inside the great hall, clutching the arm of a stranger I had mistaken for him, which meant Kael, whoever he was not a hired companion. He had never been a hired companion. I had grabbed a stranger in a corridor, told him my entire humiliating life story, dragged him into a wedding feast, introduced him as my betrothed, danced with him, confided in him, asked him to stay in my room, kissed him, given him everything I had left to give, fallen asleep in his arms. And he was not who I thought he was. My stomach dropped through the floor. "Who are you?" I whispered to the empty room. The room did not answer, but the sheets still held his warmth, and the pillows still carried his scent, and my body still remembered every place he had touched me, every careful, patient, devastating place, and the memory was sweet and sharp and terrible all at once. I pressed the parchment to my chest, heart hammering, mind racing, and stared at the dead fire and the empty bed and the morning light pooling on the floor where he had stood last night, looking at me like I was the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen. He had left. He had left, and I did not know his name, his real name, or his house, or his face in the full light of day, or why he had played along, or why he had stayed, or what he had whispered in the dark when he thought I was already sleeping. I knew only two things. First, he had been right about Isadora. He had been right about Joseph. He had been right about the way I flinched from kindness because cruelty was the only thing I had learned to expect. Second, whatever had happened in this tower chamber was not a transaction, not an arrangement, not a service. The way he had touched me with reverence and hunger and a patience that felt like it had been building for years was not the touch of a man doing a job. It was the touch of a man who had been waiting, without knowing it, for exactly this, for exactly me. And he had left anyway, because even gone, even vanished, even nothing but a note and an empty chair and a bed that still carried the shape of him, he was still the most present anyone had been in 6 months. I folded the parchment carefully and slipped it into my sleeve, close to the skin. Then I stood, pulled on my gown, lifted my chin, and walked out of the tower chamber into a morning that had changed everything. The lie was over. The truth had not yet begun. And somewhere in this city, a man who was not a companion, who had never been a companion, was carrying my secrets and my name, and the memory of a woman who had given him everything without meaning to. I was going to find him, and when I did, I was going to kill him. Right after I found out what he had whispered. Chapter 5. He came back. 3 days. That was how long it took me to almost convince myself the whole thing had been a fever dream. 3 days of sewing hems in the back room of Madame Lizette's gown shop, pricking my fingers on needles because my hands would not stop shaking, drinking too much chamomile tea, and staring at a folded piece of parchment I had read so many times the ink was beginning to smudge. I was never him. I kept the note in my sleeve. I told myself this was practical, it was small, it fit. I did not want to leave it lying around where my mother might find it and ask questions I could not answer. But the truth, the humiliating truth, was that I liked having it close. Against my skin, like a bruise I kept pressing to confirm it was real. I was pathetic. Marguerite, my oldest friend, the girl I had known since we were 6, who had once eaten an entire pie meant for a Lord's Name Day feast and blamed it on a stray dog, appeared in the shop on the second morning with the particular energy of a woman who had heard something extraordinary and had been physically restraining herself from discussing it. "Tell me everything," she said, before the door had fully closed behind her. "Good morning to you as well. Zara, the entire noble quarter is talking about a man. A tall, devastating, apparently fictional man who appeared at Joseph Hale's wedding feast on your arm and made Isadora look like she had swallowed a wasp. I need details. I need them now. I need them in order." I set down my needle. He was not fictional. Then who was he? I do not know. Marguerite stared at me. Then she pulled up a stool, sat down, and folded her arms in the manner of a woman who was not leaving until she had received a full accounting. So I told her. All of it. The companion house, the corridor, the mistake, the name Kael of Thornwall, the feast, the dance, the way he had looked at me when he said she does not perform, the tower chamber, the fire, the whisper I had not quite heard, the note. Marguerite listened with her mouth slightly open, which was the Marguerite equivalent of stunned silence. When I finished, she was quiet for a full 5 seconds, a personal record. "You grabbed a stranger," she said slowly, "in a dark corridor, told him your entire life story, paraded him in front of 200 people as your betrothed, and then asked him to stay in your room. When you say it like that, it sounds magnificent. It sounds magnificent. Zara, you absolute disaster of a woman, this is the most exciting thing that has happened in this quarter since Lord Pemberton's horse got loose in the cathedral. This is not exciting. This is a catastrophe. It is both. They are not mutually exclusive. She leaned forward. And you really have no idea who he is? None. Thornwall, that name means something. I know it does. I have heard it before in one of those old court records my father keeps in his study, the ones that smell like mold and broken dreams. Please do not research this. I am absolutely going to research this. Marguerite. Zara, a mysterious, impossibly handsome man played along with your insane lie, defended you against Isadora, said things to you that made a room full of cynical aristocrats go silent, and then vanished at dawn, leaving a cryptic note. If you think I am not going to find out who he is, you do not know me at all. She was right. I did not have the power to stop Marguerite when she had decided something, and she had clearly decided this. I returned to my sewing. The gown I was working on a commission for a minor baroness, pale blue silk with pearl beading along the bodice, required the kind of focus I could not access. Every stitch felt mechanical. My hands moved, but my mind was elsewhere. Specifically, my mind was in a towered chamber, watching firelight move across a jaw that had no right being that well defined, wondering what steady, unhurried hands would feel like if they... I stabbed myself with the needle. Ow. I sucked my finger and glared at the gown as though it were personally responsible for my inability to stop thinking about a man I had known for one night. One night. That was all. One night of borrowed courage and candlelight and a voice in the dark saying things I had needed to hear. It was not real, he was not mine. He had left, and I did not know him, and the ache in my chest was just the residue of loneliness mistaking proximity for connection. I was done. It was over. I would finish this gown, collect my commission, eat supper with my mother, and forget. The shop door opened. I did not look up. Madame Lisette handled the front. My job was the back room, the needlework, the fittings, the invisible labor that made other women beautiful. Zara? Madame Lisette's voice came from the doorway, breathless and bright in the particular way it only got when money walked through the door. You have a client. He asked for you specifically. My needle stopped. He? A lord, very well dressed, very... She paused, searching for the word. Commanding. My heart began to hammer, slowly, like a drum being struck from very far away. I do not take male clients. He wants to commission a gown for his betrothed, he says. She was practically vibrating. Zara, the fabric he described, he is talking about Alcantara silk. Do you understand? No one orders Alcantara silk. That is a 6-month commission. That is the kind of order that could... What does he look like? Madame Lisette blinked at the interruption. Tall, dark hair, eyes like a winter sea. The room tilted. Send him away. I what? Tell him I am not available. Tell him I am ill. Tell him I have developed a sudden and incurable allergy to commanding lords. Madame Lisette looked at me as though I had suggested she set the shop on fire. Zara, this is the largest potential commission we have had in 3 years. I am not sending him away. Then someone else can take it. He asked for you, by name. Of course he did. Of course he did. I closed my eyes, breathed, counted to 5, got to 3, and gave up. Fine. I set down my needle, smoothed my work apron, decided against removing it because I refused to primp for a man who had vanished from my life without explanation and then reappeared in my workplace like some sort of well-tailored haunting, and walked through the curtain into the front of the shop. He was standing by the window. The morning light hit him differently than the torchlight had. Sharper, clearer. He was wearing a dark coat simpler than the one from the feast, more practical, but still cut with the kind of precision that spoke of either excellent taste or excellent money. His hair was pushed back from his face, and his jaw was set in that particular way, and his hands were clasped loosely behind his back as he studied a display of embroidered gloves with an expression of mild interest. Those hands. I was not going to think about those hands. You, I said. He turned and smiled, That slow, devastating, patient smile that I had spent 3 days trying to scour from my memory. Good morning. Do not good morning me. What are you doing here? Commissioning a gown. You do not need a gown. My betrothed does. You do not have a betrothed. He tilted his head. Do I not? My face burned. I took 2 steps closer and lowered my voice so Madame Lisette, who was hovering behind the curtain with the subtlety of a woman eavesdropping through a silk partition, would not hear. The arrangement is over. The feast is done. You left. You left a note. I did. A note that said, and I quote, I was never him, which means everything I thought about you was wrong, which means I do not know who you are, which means you have no reason to be standing in my shop pretending to commission a gown for a betrothed who does not exist. He listened to all of this with the patience of a man watching weather pass. Are you finished? He asked. No, I am also furious. I can see that. Good. Then you understand why you should leave. He did not leave. He looked at me, really looked, the way he had at the feast, the way he had in the tower chamber, the way that made me feel like every wall I had ever built was made of parchment and he could see straight through it. I came back, he said simply, because our conversation was not finished. What conversation? We do not have a conversation. We have a series of escalating disasters. You told me about the winter gown, the one you made for Lady Voss's daughter. White velvet, silver thread, 3 weeks of candlelight. I went still. You told me it was the closest you ever came to feeling like you were becoming who you were supposed to be. He paused. I have been thinking about that for 3 days. Something cracked. Somewhere inside me, in a place I had mortared shut, something cracked. Why? I whispered. Because I know what that feels like. We stood there. The shop was quiet, except for the sound of the street outside, a cart rattling over cobblestones, a merchant calling prices, the ordinary symphony of a morning that did not know it was extraordinary. You owe me an explanation, I said finally. You owe me the truth, who you are, why you were in that corridor, why you played along. I know. Then tell me. He held my gaze, steady, unblinking. Not here. Why not? Because it is not a small truth, and you deserve to hear it somewhere that is not a shop where your employer is listening through a curtain. I glanced toward the back room. The curtain twitched guiltily. Come to the walled garden at midday, he said. The one near the old market, do you know it? Everyone knows it. Then come, let me explain. And after, if you want me to leave, I will leave. You will never see me again. The offer sat between us. Clean, simple, final. I should have said no. Every rational instinct I possessed, every lesson the last 6 months had beaten into me, screamed that trusting a man I did not know again was the act of a woman who had learned nothing. But he had come back. Joseph had not come back. Joseph had not even turned around. He had walked away with the ease of a man leaving a room he was finished with, and he had never once looked behind him to see what he had left in ruins. This man, this impossible, infuriating, nameless man, had come back. Midday, I said. You have 1 hour, and if your explanation is not satisfactory, I am going to do something regrettable with a sewing needle. His mouth curved. I would expect nothing less. He inclined his head, that courteous, not quite a bow, and walked out of the shop. The bell over the door chimed behind him. The street swallowed him up, and I stood there in my work apron with my pricked fingers and my pounding heart, and felt the note in my sleeve like a second pulse. Madame Lisette emerged from behind the curtain. Did he leave a deposit? She asked. No. Did he leave a name? No. Zara, who was that? I looked at the door where he had stood. The morning light still pooled on the floor where his shadow had been. I do not know, I said, but I am about to find out. Chapter 6. The Truth Breaks. The walled garden sat at the edge of the old market quarter, tucked behind a row of merchants' houses like a secret the city had decided to keep. Stone walls draped in ivy, gravel paths between beds of late-blooming herbs, a single bench beneath a pear tree that had not borne fruit in years but refused, stubbornly, to die. I arrived early. I told myself this was strategic. I wanted to choose my position, control the ground, not be caught off balance the way I had been in the shop. The truth was that I had been unable to sit still since he left, and my mother had asked me 3 times why I was pacing the kitchen like a woman awaiting sentencing. I am not awaiting sentencing, I had told her. I am going for a walk. In your good cloak? It might rain. It is clear skies, Zara. I am cautious by nature. She had given me the look. The Lady Marin looked quiet, perceptive, warm in a way that made lying to her feel like kicking a kitten. Be careful, she said. She did not ask with what. She did not need to. I sat on the bench and waited. The garden was empty midday on a working day. Most people were elsewhere. The air smelled of rosemary and damp stone and the last fading sweetness of summer. He arrived precisely at midday. I heard him before I saw him, footsteps on gravel, steady and unhurried, the pace of a man who did not rush because the world had generally arranged itself around his timing. He came through the gate and crossed the garden to the bench and sat beside me, leaving exactly the right amount of space between us, close enough to be intentional, far enough to be respectful. I noticed this. I hated that I noticed this. You came, he said. You told me to, I asked. I do not do things because men ask me to. I came because I require answers and you are the only source available. He smiled. That small, private smile that I was beginning to recognize as the real one, not the charming performance he deployed in public, but something softer, something that seemed to surface only when I said something that pleased him. I did not want to please him. The fact that I apparently did without trying was extremely inconvenient. Ask, he said. Who are you? That is what I am here to tell you. Then tell me. He looked at the pear tree. Something in his expression shifted, a settling, like a man preparing to lay down something heavy. My name is O'Hendricks, he said, of Thornwall. You told me that. Kael of Thornwall, except now I know Kael is not. Kael is a name I have answered to since I was a boy. My family uses it, but my given name, the one written in the records of the Northern House, is O'Hendricks. Something cold moved through my chest. The Northern House, I repeated. He turned to look at me, those gray-blue eyes steady as ever, but behind them something new, something careful, as though he was watching me the way one watches a glass balanced on the edge of a table. The Duke of Thornwall is my father. The garden went silent. Not actually silent, the birds were still singing. The wind still moved through the ivy, but the silence inside me was so total that everything else faded. I heard my own heartbeat. I heard the blood in my ears. I heard the sound of every assumption I had made about this man cracking like ice under sudden weight. The Duke, I said. Yes. Your father is the Duke of Thornwall. Yes, which makes you the heir to the duchy, the Prince of the Northern House. He paused. And as of 6 months ago, the man who returned from the Highland training camps after 15 years. I stared at him. The Highland camps. Every child in the kingdom knew the tradition. When the Prince of the Northern House came of age at 15, he was sent to the Highlands. Away from the capital, away from court, away from everything. He trained, he studied, he was forged into a ruler far from the distractions of society. He did not return until the Duke judged him ready. 15 years. He had been gone for 15 years. That was why no one recognized him. That was why Isadora could not place him. He had left the capital before she was part of court life. Before I was part of court life. He had been a boy when he left, and he had returned a man, and no one knew his face. Except now. Now everyone knew his face because of me. Because I had grabbed his arm in a corridor, called him a hired companion, and dragged him into the most public appearance of either of our lives. Oh no, I breathed. Zara. Oh no. I stood up, sat down, stood up again. My hands were shaking. My vision was doing something unpleasant at the edges. I told the prince of the northern house that I was paying him for his services. You did? I told you to smile nicely and pretend to love me. I remember. I introduced you to 200 people as my betrothed. I made you dance. I made you sit through toasts. My voice climbed to a register that alarmed a nearby pigeon. I asked you to stay in my room. You did. Why are you so calm? Because nothing you are describing is a crisis. Everything I am describing is a crisis. I mistook a prince for a hired companion. That is, there is probably a law against that. Is there a law against that? Am I going to be arrested? You are not going to be arrested. I should be arrested. I have committed some form of treason against common sense. He watched me spiral with an expression that was trying very hard not to be amused and failing. Zara, sit down. I will not sit down. Sitting down implies acceptance of the situation, and I do not accept the situation. Sit down and let me finish. Something in his voice, quiet, steady, grounded, cut through the panic. I sat. My knees were trembling. I pressed my palms flat against them and tried to breathe. Why? I asked. Why did you play along? You could have corrected me in the corridor. You could have told me who you were in the first 30 seconds. Why did you let me believe you were? Because you were magnificent. I blinked. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, looking at the gravel between his feet. I have been in the Highlands for 15 years. 15 years of training and silence and duty, and not a single conversation with anyone who was not a soldier or a tutor or a man twice my age lecturing me about governance. And then I walked into a corridor, and a woman grabbed my arm and told me, with absolute conviction, that she needed me to be hot, smile nicely, and pretend to love her for one night. He looked at me. I had never met anyone like you. My throat closed. That is not an explanation, I managed. That is flattery designed to make me forget you lied. I did not lie. You never asked who I was. You told me who I was, and I did not correct you. That is the same thing. It is not, and I think you know it is not. He paused. You needed someone that night. You needed someone who would stand beside you and not flinch. I was there. I could be that person. And something about you, he stopped, started again. I was not ready to stop being that person. I could not look at him. If I looked at him, the crack in my wall would become a collapse, and I would feel things I was not equipped to feel, and I would say something I could not take back. So I looked at the pear tree instead, and I blinked very fast, and I dug my nails into my knees until the sting replaced the tightness in my chest. The kingdom knows my name, I said. My voice was flat, controlled. The voice of a woman locking everything down. The kingdom thinks we are betrothed. Isadora knows my name. Joseph knows my name. Everyone who is at that feast is talking about the seamstress on the prince's arm. How do I undo that? Kael O'Hendricks. Whoever he was quiet for a moment. You may not be able to. That is not acceptable. I know. You ruined my life. I complicated your life. There is a difference. Not from where I am sitting. He straightened, turned toward me fully. His knee brushed mine on the bench, and the contact sent a jolt through me that I refused to acknowledge. Zara, listen to me. I came back because our conversation was not finished. But there is something else. Of course there is. The tradition of my house requires that when the prince returns from the Highlands, he must take a wife. It is not optional. It is not delayed. It is the first and immediate condition of my ascension. I turned to look at him. A wife. Yes, and you are telling me this because every lord and lady in the kingdom now believes you are that wife. The garden tilted. The bench felt less solid. The air felt thinner. No, I said. Zara, no, absolutely not. I am not. You cannot possibly be suggesting. I am telling you what is happening, not what I am suggesting. The kingdom saw us together. The rumor has already spread. I am told it moved through the capital in less than 2 days. By the time I returned to my father's house, he had already received 3 letters asking about the betrothal. My mother has asked to meet you. Your mother. She seemed quite pleased, actually. I am going to be sick. He did not argue. He sat beside me on the bench in the walled garden, patient and still, while I pressed my face into my hands and tried to process the fact that my impulsive, desperate, idiotic lie at a wedding feast had somehow entangled me with the prince of the northern house and the future of an entire duchy. "What do you want from me?" I asked, muffled against my palms. "I want you to let me explain the rest. There is more. There is always more." I lifted my face, looked at him. He was watching me with that expression, the one that made me feel seen in a way that was both terrifying and addictive. His hands were resting on his knees, those steady, unhurried hands, and I had a vivid, unwanted flash of what it would feel like if one of those hands lifted my chin, tilted my face, brought me. "Explain," I said sharply, straightening my spine. "The rest, now." If he noticed the abrupt shift in my tone from devastated to commanding in half a breath, he did not comment on it. "There is a rival," he said, "a claimant to the duchy. A man who has been positioning himself for 3 years since before my return was confirmed. He has allies at court, he has wealth, and he has spent those 3 years making the case that I am unfit to rule, that my absence proves I am detached, that my lack of a bride proves I am not serious, that the northern house would be better served by a man who is present and prepared." "Who is he?" "His name is Lord Aldrich Voss." I frowned. Voss, as in the Voss family, as in the Lady Voss whose daughter wore the winter gown you made. The families are connected, distantly, but the name carries weight. I shook my head, trying to sort the pieces. "And this Lord Aldrich, he wants the duchy. He wants the duchy. He wants the seat. He wants the power that comes with being Duke of Thornwall. And with every day I remain unbetrothed, his case grows stronger. That is your problem, not mine. It was my problem, until you walked into a feast on my arm and made it ours." The word ours landed like a stone in still water. "Do not say that," I whispered. "Do not make this sound like something shared. You chose to play along. You chose not to correct me. Whatever complication this has become, it is your doing, not mine." He nodded, slowly, accepting the blow without flinching. "You are right," he said. "I chose, and I am not asking you to fix what I broke. Then what are you asking?" He looked at me. The patience was still there, the steadiness, but behind it something else, something that looked impossibly like hope. "I am asking you to let me see you again." My breath caught. "Not as a performance," he said quickly. "Not as a companion, not as a lord, not as a prince. As the man who sat by your fire and listened to you talk about silver thread and candlelight." He paused, as someone who would very much like to hear what comes next. The garden was quiet. The pear tree shifted in the wind. A bird called from the ivy-covered wall. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say yes so badly that the force of it frightened me, because wanting things had never gone well for me, because every time I had wanted something it had been taken, because the last man I wanted had left me for my best friend and told me I was boring while he did it. So I did what I always did. "I will think about it," I said, which was not yes and was not no, and was exactly the kind of controlled, measured, self-protective non-answer that had kept me alive for 6 months. He nodded. "Then think." He rose from the bench, looked down at me. "Zara, what? The gown commission was real. Alcantara silk. Whatever you want to make it for yourself." And then he was gone. I sat on the bench for a long time after he left. The shadows moved across the gravel. The herbs released their scent into the warming air. And the note in my sleeve pressed against my skin like a heartbeat. I was never him. No, I thought, you were something much worse. You were real. Chapter 7. Marguerite found out before I told her. Of course she did. She arrived at my parents' house the following morning, practically vibrating, holding a sheaf of papers she had apparently stolen from her father's study. "Oh, Hendrix," she said, before I had finished opening the door. "Prince O'Hendrix of the Northern House, heir to the Duchy of Thornwall, returned from the Highland training camp 6 months ago after 15 years of isolation. That is the man you grabbed in a corridor and ordered to smile nicely." I closed my eyes. "Zara." She pushed past me into the kitchen, spread her papers across the table, and pointed at a page of cramped handwriting. "This is from my father's court record. The prince was sent to the Highlands at age 15, sacred tradition. The law of the Northern House, and I am paraphrasing from a very dusty document, states that when the prince returns, his first and immediate duty is to take a wife and ascend the throne as his father steps down." "I know." "You know?" "He told me yesterday." Marguerite opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Her expression cycled through shock, betrayal that I had not told her first, admiration, and finally the manic delight of a woman who had been handed the most interesting story of her lifetime and intended to wring every drop from it. "He told you, in person. The Prince of the Northern House sat you down and—" "In the walled garden, on the bench by the pear tree, like two people having a perfectly normal conversation, except one of them is apparently the future Duke of Thornwall and the other one mistook him for a hired escort." Marguerite sat down heavily. "This is the greatest thing that has ever happened to anyone I know. This is a disaster. These things are not mutually exclusive, and I really wish you would stop pretending they are." She shuffled through her papers and pulled out another sheet. "Now here is the part you may not know. Isadora, who married Joseph Hale 3 days ago and has been, according to everyone I have spoken to, absolutely frantic about the identity of the man you brought to her wedding. She has been asking questions all over the quarter. She has been writing letters. She knows something is off. She felt it at the feast. You said so yourself, and she is digging. And if she finds out he is the prince, then the woman who told you that you would always be a supporting character in other people's lives discovers that you accidentally entangled yourself with the single most important unmarried man in the kingdom." Marguerite paused for effect. "And she will lose her mind." I should not have felt satisfaction at that thought. I did. I felt a dark, sharp, thoroughly unjustified bloom of satisfaction, and I savored it for exactly 3 seconds before the dread returned. "Marguerite, this is dangerous. If Aldrich Voss is connected to Joseph's family, and Isadora is investigating, she could take this to Aldrich. She could use it against O'Hendrix, against me, which is exactly why you need to understand the law." She spread a page across the table, old parchment, the edges brown with age, the handwriting formal and dense. "The grandfather's law," she said. "It is not actually a law, it is a tradition. But in the Northern House, tradition carries the weight of law. When the Duke was young, his father, O'Hendrix's grandfather, established the succession terms. The returning prince must be wed within 1 season of his return. If he is not, the Duchy Council has the right to consider alternative claimants. 1 season. 1 season, spring, summer, autumn, winter. Pick one. The prince returned 6 months ago, at the end of spring. Autumn is ending now." I did the arithmetic. My stomach dropped. That means he has until the end of winter. Perhaps less, if the council decides to move. And Aldrich Voss has been pushing for exactly that. He wants the council to convene early to declare the prince unfit. I pressed my hands flat on the table. The wood was warm from the morning sun. My mother's bread was rising in a bowl by the window, peaceful and oblivious to the fact that my life was collapsing. "Why me?" I murmured. Of all the women in the kingdom, noble women, ladies of great houses, women with dowries and influence and connections that would actually help him, why is he coming to my gown shop and asking to see me again? Marguerite looked at me with an expression I had never seen from her before. Not her usual sharpness, not her manic energy, something quieter, something that looked almost like tenderness. Maybe because none of them grabbed him in a corridor and told him to pretend. That is not a reason to. Maybe because none of them sat by a fire and talked about silver thread like it was the most important thing in the world. Marguerite, or maybe, and I know this is a radical concept for you, Zara, so brace yourself, maybe he likes you. Not your house, not your dowry, not your strategic value. You. The word landed somewhere deep, somewhere I had boarded up and nailed shut and hung a sign on that read "closed permanently due to structural damage." People do not choose me, I said, quietly, without self-pity, just the flat, practiced statement of a woman who had accepted a fact the way one accepts weather. That is not how my life works. Your life has not had a prince in it before. My life had a Joseph in it, and we both know how that ended. Marguerite was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Joseph was a coward who chose the easiest path. Isadora was a snake who told you that you were ordinary because she needed you to be small so she could feel large. Neither of them saw you, Zara. Not once. Not ever. Her voice was steady, fierce in a way that Marguerite rarely was. She wore her loyalty like armor, but she usually hid it behind jokes and chaos. Now it was bare. This man saw you in one night, she said, and he came back. I did not cry, but it was close, the closest it had been since the tower chamber. I need to speak with my mother, I said. Lady Marin was in the garden. She was always in the garden in the late morning, kneeling among the herbs, hands in the soil, her graying hair loosely pinned. There was nothing performative about my mother's beauty. It was the beauty of a woman who had lived honestly and worn the years with grace. I sat on the stone bench beside her rosemary and told her everything. Not just the feast, not just the lie, everything. The companion house, the mistake, the name, the dance, the tower chamber, the note, the gown shop, the walled garden, the prince, the tradition, the rival, the deadline. She listened the way she always listened, without interruption, without judgment, her hands still in the soil, her eyes steady. When I finished, the garden was quiet except for the wind and a thrush singing from the wall. He came back, my mother said. Yes, and he told you who he was. Yes, and he asked to see you again. Yes. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers working around the base of a sage plant, loosening the earth. Do you believe him? She asked. I do not know. I want to believe him. And wanting to believe someone is exactly how I ended up with Joseph. My mother looked up at me, her eyes warm, dark, the same eyes I saw in my own mirror, held something between caution and hope. Joseph never came back, Zara. I know. Joseph never asked to see you again. He never sat by your fire. He never told you who he really was. I know. Those are not small differences. I pulled at a thread on my sleeve, the sleeve that held the note, still folded, still pressed against my skin. What should I do? My mother smiled, the small, wise, infinitely patient smile that had guided me through every crisis of my 25 years. I think you should meet him again. Not because he is a prince, I do not care about that, and you should not either. Because a man who returns to tell the truth after he could have stayed hidden is a man worth understanding. She paused. But Zara, be careful. I trust your heart. I do not yet trust his intentions. What if they are the same thing? Then you will know, in time. I nodded, sat with her in the garden, let the sage and rosemary fill the silence. And in the quiet, I let myself think carefully, deliberately, with full awareness that I was doing it about a man who had been alone for 15 years, and a woman who had been alone for 6 months, and a bench in a walled garden where two people had sat close enough to touch and hadn't. I thought about his hands. I always thought about his hands, those steady, unhurried, infuriatingly competent hands that held goblets and offered arms and rested on knees, and if I allowed the thought to complete itself, which I would not, absolutely not, under any circumstances. You are blushing, my mother observed. It is the sun. It is October. I burn easily." She smiled and returned to her sage, and I sat there burning in the weak October sun and thinking about hands I had no right to think about, and a man I was not ready to trust, and a future I could not yet see. But I could feel it. The way you feel a storm before it breaks the charge in the air, the stillness, the sense that something enormous is gathering just beyond the horizon. Something was coming, and for the first time in 6 months, I was not dreading it. I was terrified, but I was not dreading it. That evening, I sent a message to the address he had left, a small, folded square of parchment, carried by a boy from the market who charged me 2 coppers and promised discretion with the confidence of a 12-year-old who had no idea what discretion meant. The message said, "The walled garden, tomorrow, same bench. Bring an explanation for every single thing you have done since the corridor, and bring something to eat. I think better when I am not hungry." The reply came an hour later, delivered by a different boy, this one better dressed, which told me something about the household it had come from. "Done. I will bring bread from the northern bakery. You have not lived until you have had their honey loaves. And Zara, I will bring every explanation you ask for, including the ones you have not thought to ask for yet. K." I read it 3 times, pressed it against the other note in my sleeve. 2 pieces of parchment, 2 conversations unfinished. And somewhere in the city, a prince who had been alone for 15 years was buying bread for a seamstress who had been alone for 6 months, and neither of them had any idea what they were walking into. But I was going to find out. Chapter 8. A debt repaid. He brought the bread. I want to be clear about this, because it matters. He did not send a servant with the bread. He did not have it delivered on a silver tray by a liveried footman, which, as I was rapidly learning, was well within his power. He carried it himself. A cloth-wrapped loaf of honey bread from the northern bakery, still warm, tucked under his arm like a man who had walked across the city with nothing more important to do than keep a promise about breakfast. I was already sitting on the bench when he arrived. I had been there for 20 minutes, which I justified as punctuality and which was actually the restless pacing of a woman who had not slept. "You came early," he said. "You are late." "I am exactly on time." "Then I was early, which means you are late relative to me, which is the only measurement that matters." He sat beside me, set the bread between us, unwrapped it. The scent hit me, warm honey, toasted grain, something faintly sweet underneath, and my stomach made a sound that undermined every shred of dignity I was trying to maintain. "Eat," he said. I tore off a piece. It was, infuriatingly, the best bread I had ever tasted. "This is acceptable," I said. "You are making a face that suggests it is considerably more than acceptable." "I am making a face that suggests I am thinking. I think with my mouth." They have noticed. We ate in silence for a moment. The garden was quiet again midday, the old market humming distantly beyond the walls. A late butterfly drifted between the herb beds, confused by the lingering warmth of an autumn that had not yet surrendered to winter. I finished my piece of bread, brushed the crumbs from my skirt, and turned to face him. "I have questions. I know, many questions. I expected nothing less. First, the night of the feast. When you were in that corridor, why were you there? If you were not a companion from the higher house, what were you doing in the servants' passage of Ashworth Manor?" He leaned back on the bench, stretching his long legs across the gravel. The morning light caught the scar above his eyebrow, thin, pale, a souvenir from the Highlands, I assumed. "I was meeting someone," he said. "A contact, a man who had served in my father's household before the training camps. He had information about Aldrich Voss's movements. The servants' corridor was the most discreet route." "So you were conducting clandestine political business in the same corridor where I was supposed to meet a hired companion." "The world is full of coincidences. This was not a coincidence. This was a catastrophe of logistics. And yet," he smiled, "here we are." I ignored the smile, or tried to, The problem with his smile was that it did something to the light, caught it, held it, redirected it in a way that made the garden feel warmer and the bench feel smaller and the distance between us feel like a suggestion rather than a fact. Second question, I said firmly. The name. Kael. You gave me a real name, not an alias, not a cover. Why? Because you asked me to choose and I chose the truth. He paused. The only lie that night was the one you built. Everything I gave you was real. That landed. I felt it settle somewhere behind my ribs, heavy and warm. Third question. The whisper. He went still. In the tower chamber, I said, before I fell asleep. You said something. I caught the end, and you are nothing like they told you. What did that mean? Who is they? He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the butterfly completed a full circuit of the sage bed and returned to the rosemary. Long enough that I began to wonder if he was going to answer at all. Before I was sent to the Highlands, he said slowly, as though each word cost him something. There was someone. I waited. A girl, my age, the daughter of a southern lord, one of my father's allies. We were young, too young to know what we were doing, but old enough to believe it mattered. He looked at the pear tree. I was 15. She told me she would wait. She did not wait. She did not wait. A pause. She married another man within the year, and before she did, she sent me a letter. One letter to the Highlands, where letters take weeks to arrive, and there is nothing to do but read them over and over in the dark. I held my breath. She told me I was not the kind of man women waited for, that I was too serious, too quiet, too contained, that I would spend my life in those mountains and come back to find the world had moved on without me. His jaw tightened a micro-expression, barely visible, but I saw it. She told me I was the kind of man people endured, not the kind they chose. The words hung in the air like smoke. I knew that wound. I knew it the way you know your own reflection intimately, instinctively, without needing to be told what you were looking at. You are always so boring. You will always be a supporting character. Different words. Same blade. So when I said you are nothing like they told you, he finished, I was saying it to both of us. The crack in my wall widened. I could feel it, not a collapse, not yet, but a structural shift, the kind that precedes either renovation or ruin. I am sorry, I said quietly, that she did that to you. I'm sorry that he did that to you. We sat with it, the shared wound, the mutual understanding that we were both people who had been told by someone we trusted that we were not enough and who had carried that verdict like a stone in a pocket for years. Fourth question, I said, because if I stayed in that silence any longer, I was going to do something reckless with my feelings. The proposal, the real one, what are you actually asking me? He turned to face me fully, his knee pressed against mine on the bench. I did not move away. I noticed that I did not move away. I filed this observation under things to panic about later. My house requires a bride. The deadline is the end of winter. Aldrich Voss is already petitioning the Duchy Council to convene early and declare me unfit. If I arrive at the council without a betrothed, his case strengthens. So you need a political arrangement. I need a wife, but I am not asking you to be one. I frowned. Then what? I am asking you to be betrothed, publicly, for the duration of the political crisis, long enough to satisfy the council, to neutralize Aldrich's claim, to give me the time I need to secure the duchy. A false betrothal, a real betrothal with an agreed end. After the council rules, you would be free to walk away, no obligation, no binding contract. A transaction, your time and your name, in exchange for compensation that would be substantial and unconditional. I studied him. He held my gaze without flinching. You are asking me to do exactly what I did at the feast, I said. Pretend, perform, lie. Yes, except this time, the audience is not 200 wedding guests. It is the entire kingdom. Yes. Yes. I let out a breath that felt like it had been lodged in my chest for days. Why me? And do not say, because you were magnificent. I need a real answer. He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words with the care of a man who understood that the wrong ones would lose him everything. Because you have already done it once. Because the kingdom already believes it. Because undoing the rumor would be harder and more damaging to both of us than sustaining it. And because... He stopped. Because what? Because I have spent 15 years learning to read people. Strategy, intent, deception, the Highlands teach you to see through all of it. And when I look at you, Zara, I do not see performance. I see someone who is exactly who she is, even when she is terrified, even when she is furious, even when she is sitting on a bench eating bread and pretending she is not already considering saying yes. I opened my mouth, closed it. He was right. I was considering it. I had been considering it since I sat down. Maybe since the walled garden, maybe since the tower chamber, maybe since the corridor when I grabbed a stranger's arm and he did not pull away. If I do this, I said slowly, I want terms. Name them. First, I am compensated fairly, not as charity as payment for a service. I am a seamstress from a minor house. I am not ashamed of that. But I will not pretend that my time and my name and the upheaval to my life are free. Done. Second, my family is not drawn into this. My mother is not paraded. My household is not disrupted. Done. Third, I do not trust you. He did not flinch. I know. I am saying it now because I want you to hear it. I am agreeing to this because you acted for me at the feast without being asked. You stood beside me. You defended me. You did not have to, and you did. That is a debt, and I pay my debts. But debt is not trust, and I will not pretend otherwise. He held my gaze, steady, patient, seeing everything as always. I know, he said again. It should have been infuriating, the calmness, the acceptance, the refusal to argue or persuade or push. But it was not infuriating. It was worse. It was disarming. Because a man who argues when you say I do not trust you is a man trying to change your mind. A man who says I know is a man willing to wait until you change it yourself. And waiting was more dangerous than chasing. Then we have a deal, I said. He reached into his coat, the same dark coat, simple and immaculate, and produced a small box. Velvet, dark blue, the color of deep water. He opened it. The ring inside was not what I expected. It was not ostentatious, no massive gemstone, no elaborate filigree. It was a band of white gold, slender, with a single sapphire the color of a winter sky. Small, perfect. The kind of ring a man chooses when he has been paying attention to who a woman actually is, rather than who he wants her to be. I stared at it. You already had this, I said. You came here with this. I did. You were very confident I would say yes. I was hopeful you would say yes. There is a difference. Yes, he said, and I have spent 15 years learning to tell the two apart. He held the ring out, not on bended knee, not with flourish, just a man offering something to a woman, steady-handed, patient, unhurried. I took it, slid it onto my finger. It fit. Of course it fit. I looked at the sapphire catching the midday light, and I looked at his hands, those steady, infuriating, impossible hands, and I had a vivid, detailed, completely inappropriate thought about what those hands would feel like if they were not holding a ring box but tracing the line of my jaw, tilting my face, pulling me. We should discuss logistics, I said crisply, and tucked my hand into my lap as though the ring were a secret and my own imagination were an enemy combatant. If he noticed the shift, and he always noticed, he said nothing. He simply smiled that small, private smile and began to talk about councils and timelines in the political landscape of the Northern House. But the ring was warm on my finger, and his knee was still pressed against mine. And somewhere underneath the strategy and the terms and the careful, negotiated distance between us, something was shifting, something I was not ready to name, something that felt terrifyingly like the beginning of everything I had been afraid to want. That evening, I sat with my mother in the kitchen. The ring was on my finger. I had not taken it off. I told myself this was because removing it and replacing it repeatedly would look suspicious if anyone were watching. No one was watching. I was in my mother's kitchen. The only witnesses were a loaf of bread and a slightly judgmental cat. "It is beautiful," my mother said, turning my hand gently to catch the candlelight on the sapphire. "Simple, thoughtful. It is a political arrangement. The ring is not political, Zara." I pulled my hand back. "What do you mean?" "I mean that a man conducting a political arrangement gives a woman a large, impressive ring, one that signals power and wealth. A man who is paying attention gives a woman a ring that suits her." She looked at me. "That ring suits you." I did not have a response to this. My mother had a gift for observations that dismantled my defenses without appearing to try. "He came to the garden himself," she continued. "He brought bread. He answered every question you asked. He accepted your terms without argument." A pause. "These are not the actions of a man who is only thinking about politics. Or they are exactly the actions of a man who is very good at making politics feel personal." My mother smiled, that quiet, knowing smile. "Perhaps, but I would like to meet him." "You will. He has asked to come to the house." "Good." She rose, touching my shoulder as she passed. "I will watch him carefully, Zara. I want to see what kind of man he is when he is not performing for you." "He says he does not perform. All men say that. The good ones mean it." She left the kitchen. I sat alone with the ring and the candle and the judgmental cat, and I thought about a man who brought bread and answered questions and said I know when I told him I did not trust him. And I thought about winter, coming fast, bringing with it a council, a rival, a reckoning, and a betrothal that was supposed to be temporary but already felt like it was sinking roots. Chapter 9. The news moved through the kingdom like fire in dry hay. That was how Marguerite described it, breathless, thrilled, arriving at my door 3 days after the ring went on my finger with the energy of a woman who had appointed herself war correspondent for the most dramatic betrothal in a generation. "It is everywhere," she said, dropping into a chair and fanning herself with a folded news sheet. "The taverns, the market, the court, everyone is talking. The prince of the northern house betrothed to a seamstress from the noble quarter. You are the most famous woman in the kingdom, and you did it by accident." "I did not do anything by accident. I did it by catastrophic misjudgment, which is different. The ballads do not make that distinction." "There are ballads." "There is one. A bard at the Stag and Scepter has been performing it nightly. It is called The Seamstress and the Shadow Prince. It is terrible. I have memorized all 4 verses. I put my face in my hands. The weeks that followed were a blur of new realities. Oh, Hendrix, I was learning to call him that, though my tongue still sometimes stumbled toward Kael, toward the name that belonged to the man in the corridor rather than the prince in the council chamber had been meticulous in his preparation. A formal announcement was made to the Duchy Council. Letters were sent. My name was entered into the official record of the Northern House alongside his, written in ink that smelled of iron and permanence. He came to my parents' house, as promised. My mother received him in the front room, the good room, the one we only used for guests and name day celebrations, the one with the embroidered cushion she had made herself, and the window that overlooked the small garden. She served tea. She asked him about the highlands. She listened. He spoke about the mountains, the silence, the training, the years of discipline that had hollowed him out and rebuilt him from the inside. He spoke without self-pity, without performance, in the plain language of a man describing a landscape he knew intimately. My mother watched him the way she watched bread rise patiently, looking for signs of substance, waiting to see if it held. Afterward, she found me in the kitchen. "He is careful," she said. "Is that good or bad?" "It is interesting. He speaks like a man who has had a long time to think about what matters, and he looks at you." She paused. "How does he look at me?" Like you're the first unscripted thing that has happened to him in 15 years. I did not know what to do with that, so I washed the teacups and said nothing. The trouble came as trouble always does through Isadora. I should have expected it. Marguerite had warned me. The connections were there: Aldrich Voss, the Hale family, the threads of trade and alliance that linked them. But I had been distracted by rings and bread, and the terrifying warmth of a betrothal that was supposed to be strategic and felt increasingly like something else. It was Marguerite who brought the news. She arrived at the gown shop on a Tuesday morning, out of breath, her cloak askew, holding a letter she had intercepted. Do not ask me how. Marguerite's methods were best left unexamined from a courier traveling between the Hale estate and Lord Aldrich's holdings in the south. "Read it," she said, thrusting the letter at me. I read it. The letter was from Isadora, addressed to Lord Aldrich Voss, and its contents turned my blood to ice. She had done what Isadora always did. She had investigated. She had dug. She had pulled at every thread until the tapestry unraveled, and she had found the one thing that could destroy everything. The companion house. Isadora had found the companion hire house. She had spoken to the proprietor. She had confirmed that a woman matching my description had visited, had hired a companion, had paid in advance for a man to accompany her to a wedding feast. And she had confirmed that the actual companion, the real one, the one I had paid for, had arrived at Ashworth Manor and been turned away at the gate. Which meant the betrothal was a lie. Which meant the prince had knowingly participated in a deception. Which meant the foundation of his claim that he was a serious, stable, married and ready ruler was built on a farce invented by a desperate seamstress in a corridor. Isadora's letter to Aldrich was precise, surgical, and devastating. She laid out the evidence, she named the companion house, she described the timeline, and she concluded with the recommendation that chilled me to my core. Present this to the council. The prince's betrothal is a fabrication, a stunt arranged by a woman of no consequence to salvage her pride. If the council sees this evidence, they will have no choice but to rule in your favor. The duchy will be yours, a woman of no consequence. The words blurred. I set the letter down. Zara, Marguerite said gently, a woman of no consequence. I laughed. It came out jagged. She is still doing it. Even now, even with a prince on my arm and a ring on my finger, she is still telling the world I am nothing. She is telling one man you are nothing, and that man is going to use it to take a duchy. I pressed my palms flat on the work table. The wood was scarred with years of pinning and cutting my marks, my work, the evidence of a life spent making beautiful things for people who never knew my name. When? I asked. When does Aldrich plan to present this to the council? The Winter Council convenes in 10 days. 10 days. I folded the letter, slid it into my sleeve alongside the notes, both of them, still there, still pressed against my skin, and stood. I need to speak with O'Hendricks. I found him at the Northern House, the Thornwall family's residence in the capital, a severe stone building near the High Quarter that looked like it had been designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Servants admitted me without question. The ring apparently was its own credential. He was in the study, a long dark room lined with maps and books and the accumulated weight of 100 years of governance. He was standing at the window, his back to the door, looking out at the city below. He turned when I entered. Zara, I did not expect— We have a problem. I handed him the letter. He read it. His expression did not change, not immediately, not visibly. But I had spent enough time studying this man to recognize the micro-shifts, the tightening of his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the way his fingers pressed harder against the parchment at the edges. Isadora, he said. Isadora. He set the letter on the desk, placed his hands flat on either side of it, looked at the words as though he could will them out of existence. She found the companion house, I said. She has the timeline, she has the proof, and she has given it to Aldrich. I see. If he presents this to the council, it is over. Your claim collapses, the betrothal is exposed as a fabrication, and my voice tightened. I become the woman who tricked a prince, or the woman who is too pathetic to attend a wedding alone. Either way, I am a joke, again. He looked up from the letter, looked at me. You are not a joke, he said, quietly, with a certainty that felt like a hand closing around mine. Do not manage me, not now. I need you to think, not reassure. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. The warmth in his expression shifted, sharpened into something more focused. The strategist, the man the Highlands had built. She has the evidence, he said, but evidence requires context. The companion house can confirm you hired someone. They cannot confirm what happened afterward. They can confirm the real companion never reached me, which means whoever I did arrive with was not a hired man. That proves I was not a companion. It does not prove the betrothal is false. I frowned. How? He straightened, turned to face me fully, and I saw at the moment the strategy crystallized behind his eyes, the way a general sees the battlefield rearrange. The truth, Zara. We use the truth. The truth is that I mistook you for a hired companion and dragged you into a wedding feast. The truth is that I met a woman in a corridor who needed someone to stand beside her, and I chose to. Not because I was paid, not because I was deceived, because I wanted to. He stepped closer, and the truth is that after one night I came back. I sought you out. I asked for your hand. Those are not the actions of a man who was tricked. Those are the actions of a man who chose. My heart was hammering. Oh, Hendrix, the council does not need to know about the companion house. What the council needs to know is this. A man returned from 15 years in the Highlands, met a woman who did not know who he was, and fell for her before she ever knew his title. That is not a scandal, Zara. That is the most honest courtship anyone in that council chamber has ever heard. The room was very quiet. The maps on the walls seemed to hold their breath. You are asking me to tell the truth, I said slowly, the real truth, in front of the council. I am asking you to stand beside me, the way you did at the feast, except this time no lie, no performance, just who you are. Who I am is a seamstress from a minor house who cries into her pillow and cannot stop thinking about your hands. The last part slipped out. There was a silence so total I could hear the candle flames breathing. My hands, he repeated. That is not, I did not mean that was a rhetorical, the point is, Zara. What? He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, could smell wood smoke and leather and that clean, cold water scent that had been haunting me since the feast. If it helps, he said very quietly, I have not been able to stop thinking about you either. My breath stopped. Not your hands specifically, he added, and there was something in his voice raw, unguarded, so different from the careful patience he usually wore. But the way you talk when you are angry, and the way you looked in the torchlight when you told me about the winter gown, and the way you fell asleep trusting me even though you had every reason not to. I could not speak. I could not move. The distance between us was nothing a breath, a heartbeat, a decision. I did not plan this, he said. I walked into a corridor to meet a contact and a woman grabbed my arm and ruined every plan I had ever made. And I have been trying since that moment to find a version of this that makes strategic sense, but it does not. He paused. Because this is not strategy. This is just you. The wall collapsed, not a crack, not a shift. A full, catastrophic, irreversible collapse of every defense I had built since Joseph, since Isadora, since the day I was told I was ordinary and believed it. I kissed him. I do not know who moved first. I think it was me. I think I reached for him the way I had reached for his arm in the corridor instinctively, desperately, without the permission of my rational mind. My hands found the front of his coat and pulled, and his hands found my waist and held. And then his mouth was on mine, and every thought I had ever had about those hands and that jaw and that voice was replaced by the reality of him, which was better, which was so much better, which was warm and fierce and unhurried in the way that everything about this man was unhurried. He kissed me like he had been thinking about it for weeks. He kissed me like I was not ordinary. He kissed me like I was the only thing in the room, in the city, in the kingdom worth paying attention to. When we finally broke apart, his forehead rested against mine. His breathing was ragged. His hands were still on my waist. "The council convenes in 10 days, I whispered. "I know. We need a plan. I know. I still do not fully trust you. I know. But I'm going to stand beside you anyway." He pulled back enough to look at me. His eyes were the color of winter gray and blue and bright, with something I recognized finally for what it was. Not strategy, not patience, not performance. Hope. "Then we face them together," he said. The Winter Council convened on the last day of November, in the great hall of the Northern House, a cavernous stone chamber built for judgment, lined with the banners of every sworn house in the duchy. The council sat in a half-circle, 12 lords and ladies, grim-faced, powerful, holding the future of Thornwall in their collective hands. Lord Aldrich Voss arrived with his retinue. He was a sharp-featured man with pale eyes and the particular confidence of someone who has been winning for so long he has forgotten what losing feels like. At his side, and this sent a blade through my gut, stood Isadora. Not as a council member, as a witness. She saw me across the hall. Our eyes met. She smiled. That porcelain smile. The one that said, "I told you, you will always be a supporting character." I lifted my chin. The proceedings were formal. The Duke O'Hendricks's father, a broad, weathered man who looked like he had been carved from the same mountain that housed the training camps, presided. Aldrich presented his case with the precision of a man who had rehearsed it in mirrors. The prince was untested, absent for 15 years, and his sudden betrothal to an unknown woman of modest birth was a transparent attempt to satisfy tradition without substance. Then Isadora was called. She stood before the council and spoke clearly. She described the companion house. She described the timeline. She described a desperate woman who hired an escort to attend a wedding feast and accidentally mistook a prince for a paid companion. The council murmured. Aldrich smiled. The Duke's expression was unreadable. And then O'Hendricks stood. He did not argue. He did not refute the companion house because it was true, and he had told me he would not build anything on a lie. Not anymore. Instead, he told them the truth. He told them about a corridor and a woman who did not know his name. He told them about a feast where he chose to stand beside a stranger because something in her courage moved him. He told them about a tower chamber and a fire and a conversation about silver thread. He told them about a note left at dawn and a bread run across the city and a bench in a walled garden where two people who had been told they were not enough found each other. He told them he loved me. He said it simply, without performance. The way he said everything steady, unhurried, as though the words had been waiting 15 years for a room large enough to hold them. And then he said, "If the council believes that love must be strategic to be valid, that it must come packaged with a dowry and a noble lineage and a carefully negotiated alliance, then I am not the ruler you want, because I chose a woman who chose me before she knew what I was worth, and I will not apologize for that." The hall was silent. The Duke looked at me, looked at his son, looked at the council. Then he said in a voice like stone, "Let the woman speak." I stood. My hands were trembling. My heart was in my throat. 200 years of tradition and power and politics stared at me from 12 carved chairs, and I was a seamstress from a minor house in a gown I had sewn myself, standing on a floor that had held the feet of kings. I looked at Isadora. She was watching me with an expression caught between triumph and uncertainty. She had expected me to crumble. She had expected the same Zara she had broken 6 months ago, the Zara who believed she was ordinary. I was not that Zara anymore. "My name is Zara Ashworth," I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. "I am a seamstress. My family is small and honest, and we have never owned anything that was not earned. I did hire a companion to attend a wedding feast because I was afraid, because I had been told by someone I trusted that I would never be chosen, and I believed it." I paused. I was wrong. I looked at O'Hendricks. He was watching me the way he always watched me, like I was the only thing in the room worth seeing. I did not know he was a prince when I grabbed his arm in that corridor. I did not know he was a prince when he danced with me, or when he sat by my fire, or when he came to my shop with bread and honesty and a patience I had done nothing to deserve. I did not choose him for his title. I chose him because he came back. And in my experience, in the small, unglamorous, very real experience of a woman from a minor house, the people who come back are the people who mean it. The silence held. Then the Duke spoke. The council will deliberate. They deliberated for 3 hours. I spent them in a small antechamber off the great hall, sitting on a stone bench that was not nearly as comfortable as the one in the walled garden, eating nothing, saying nothing, holding the notes in my sleeve like talismans. O'Hendricks sat beside me. We did not speak. His hand found mine. I let him hold it. When the doors opened, it was the Duke himself who emerged. He looked at his son, looked at me. The council has ruled, he said. The betrothal stands, the succession proceeds. Aldrich Voss's claim is dismissed. My knees gave out. O'Hendricks caught me, of course he caught me, because this man had been catching me since the corridor, since the first moment, since before I knew I was falling. Breathe, he murmured. I am breathing. You are shaking. That is breathing with emphasis. He laughed. A real laugh, deep, warm, unguarded, the kind of laugh I had never heard from him before. The kind that came from a man who had been holding his breath for 15 years and had finally been told he could exhale. In the corridor outside the great hall, as the council members filed past and the servants began extinguishing torches, I caught a glimpse of Isadora. She was standing by a window. Aldrich was already gone, retreated to whatever shadow he had come from. Joseph was nowhere in sight. She was alone. Our eyes met. I expected triumph. I expected vindication. I expected to feel the savage, burning satisfaction of proving her wrong, of standing in the wreckage of her plan with a prince's ring on my finger and the council's blessing at my back. But what I felt was simpler than that. Quieter, sadder. I felt sorry for her, because Isadora had spent her whole life performing, curating, calculating, arranging every piece of her world to achieve maximum effect. And I had spent the last month learning, painfully and imperfectly, that the bravest thing a person can do is stop performing, is show up exactly as they are, is grab a stranger's arm in a corridor and say, I need you, and mean it. Isadora could not do that. Maybe she never could. I turned away and walked toward the man who had come back. Chapter 10. The shop was mine, not Madame Lizette's, not a back room with borrowed needles and someone else's name on the door. Mine, a narrow, sun-filled space on the corner of Briar Street, with the sign above the door reading Ashworth in thread in gold letters I had painted myself, the colors of nothing and no one but me. O'Hendricks had offered to fund it. I had refused. He had offered again, more carefully. I had refused again, more loudly. In the end, the betrothal compensation, my money, my terms, went toward the lease. He had smiled when I told him, You are the most stubborn woman in the kingdom. I prefer determined. I prefer magnificent. He came to the shop every Wednesday. It simply happened, the way tides happen, the way a man who has been alone for 15 years gravitates toward the one place where someone sees him without his title. He brought bread. Always bread. From the northern bakery, the honey loaves I had eaten on a bench in a walled garden the day I agreed to a betrothal I did not believe in, and now could not imagine my life without. On a Wednesday in early spring, he sat in his usual chair and said, The council has ruled. There is no political reason for you to stay. Those gray-blue eyes, patient as stone, warm as a fire in a tower chamber. Do you want to stay? My hands were shaking. I hid them in my skirt. I want you to know she was wrong, I said. The girl who told you that you were not worth waiting for. And I am sorry it took 15 years and a woman grabbing your arm in a corridor to find out. I want to stay, not as an arrangement, not as a transaction, but as someone who chose you before she knew what you were worth. He stood, crossed the room, lifted my chin with that steady, unhurried hand. "Do you want to stay?" he asked again. "Yes," I whispered. He kissed me then, not the desperate wall-collapsing kiss from the study. Something slower, something that tasted like time and patience and the sweetness of two people who had waited long enough to know what waiting costs. The wedding was on a Wednesday because Wednesday had become our day. I walked the path alone, my choice. The whole point of this story from the very beginning was that I was not a supporting character in anyone else's narrative, not even my own wedding. When I reached him, I stopped. I needed a moment to look, because this man was not composed or strategic. He was simply someone who had been alone for 15 years, watching the one person who made him feel the relief of its ending walk toward him in a white gown that caught the winter light like frost on glass. He went first with the vows. "I did not know what I was for until you," he said, his voice unguarded. "The only thing worth building toward is someone who sees you before they know what you are worth. I am for this. I am for you." I looked at my paper, my voice steady. "I was told I would always be a supporting character. I hired you to pretend, but you refused to see something small. I choose you, not because you are a prince, but because when I stop performing, you are still there. I will be there too, every Wednesday, every day after." The celebration was small by Dutchy standards and enormous by mine. We danced, and for the first time, I wasn't looking at the crowd or at the ghosts of the past. I was only looking at him. That night, after the guests had gone, I stood in the back of my shop. The dress form was empty. The shop smelled of silk and beeswax, and my name was still on the sign above the door in gold paint I had mixed myself. He appeared in the doorway, still in his wedding coat. "What are you thinking?" I looked at the bolts of silk, the small, ordinary, magnificent evidence of a life built entirely by hand. "I am thinking Isadora was right," I said. He went still. "I am a seamstress, I always will be. She was right about all of it. She was just wrong about what it meant." He crossed the room, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones with that same maddening patience. "It means everything," he whispered. "I know," I said. "I know it now." He kissed me in the dark, with the city humming outside and my name in gold above the door. And for the first time, the very first time, I was not a supporting character in someone else's story. I was the whole damn story, and it was just beginning. The following Wednesday, he brought bread. He always brought bread. If you've made it this far, you are not ordinary. You never were. The people who told you otherwise were writing a story too small to hold you. Write your own. The people who leave never saw you clearly. But the ones who stay, the ones who come back, who sit by your fire, who bring bread on Wednesday mornings, they saw you all along. Don't forget to like and subscribe so we don't lose each other. Your story is just beginning.